Good evening, folks. If we could call our meeting to order. Thank you.
Don't sell the skate park.
I'm going to pass around a couple of things here. The sign-in sheet, if you, whoops, excuse me.
$9 million.
Thank you.
Getting closer and closer.
Last week, we said we'd have some information for you following your data input. And there's one piece that was single sheet that should be at your place, which is one item that came in this afternoon. We've taken the names off of all of these, but what I'm going to give you is the in toto everything that we've received, unit by unit, but there won't have a name on it. If somehow inside the data you can glean who it is, I'm sorry about that, but the names have been taken off. And so I'm going to pass this around, if I might. I'll work two ways. This is the raw data. And this is, as we mentioned, that's the way we're going to share this with you so you can see everything that was suggested. The second thing I'd like to pass around takes that same information and it boils it down, attempting to, what we've tried to do is separate it into 19 categories. We may not have hit it right on the mark, but we're trying to divide it up so it's a little more digestible. It is exactly the same information. Again, with nothing changed. It's just divided into categories. It might make it a little bit easier for conversation and for review.
Dick, I have a question. You said this is what we have done. Who's we?
Myself and the staff. By and large, all this information came to me, and I put it together, and I got help from the staff to separate it out and divide it into those 19 categories.
Well, I have kind of a recommendation, and I'd like to make a motion to start off with, to start our meeting off, is that I'd like to make a motion that our committee choose a committee representative from our members to write the drafts for our committee and our final recommendations to City Council. This is not by no means any reflection to you as our facilitator. I just believe that since we have freely dedicated our personal time to the CBC, that this is our committee. We are in the process of generating all the cost savings recommendations and the different ways to produce more revenue. Jointly as a committee, I suggest that we will make the final recommendations. And I would like to suggest that Mike Kiak for this position, if he's willing to take on the responsibility. Mike has shared his financial knowledge with us in our discussions, and he possesses very strong management qualities, and isn't now or nor has been ever financially tied into the city. So I would like to make a motion that Mike Kiak become our committee representative and would make our reports for us, because we want ownership of what's produced.
Excuse me, we already voted on that.
No, on a chairman. We voted on a chairman. This is a person that would just write up our drafts and our final recommendations to City Council.
That is going to work with Dick or work independently of Dick and come up with different results or the same results?
Well, he would take our information that we produce from here and write our report, so it becomes us.
It's already here. Everything that we would
He just said that staff, Charles, he just said that staff and he did this.
was all our recommendation.
There's not a word in here that's not your language, just so you understand that. I mentioned that. Let me make it clear. This is not a final report. This is giving you data exactly the way we said we would. Everything that was submitted is now just laid out there for you, so that when you begin to discuss this, you'll have everything in front of you. And this evening, provided, and I'm not ignoring your motion on the table, this evening, following your discussion at the last session, was you'd like an opportunity individually to have your comments. So we have one presentation this evening. We have this amount of data, which there's no way you're going to read it at this meeting. So this is preparatory to the meeting 2 weeks from tonight. And it is only 100%, not one word comes from anybody other than you that's in the materials that I just handed you.
What was the 19 categories you were talking about?
The second sheet that went around was just an attempt.
Okay, I haven't seen that yet.
I think it's to your right. An attempt to gather them. If they need to be adjusted, so be it. But we wanted to at least give you all that data in a fashion that we thought might be usable. I tend to use the word we even when it's me. So sorry for that. I don't use the word I anymore, and I have to. Now, one of the things at the end of the journey that we committed to was that I would attempt to assemble something consistent with your direction, which will begin to flow on the 24th, and bring it back to you. There will be nothing that I would submit forward or suggest that you submit forward that isn't consistent with your expectations and your direction. I simply become a scribe. That's not to defer you from any other approach that you want to take, but that's the way that current structure works. Yes, sir.
So what you've done with these 19 is you've taken each one, and you put it in a certain bucket.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
But you've still included every single comment?
Every single one. In fact, you will notice in reading through that if you say, well, this is here 3 times, it's here 3 times because 3 people said that. So we didn't try to say, well, this summarizes, and there is no summarization here. There is simply the entirety of the data presented in some way with an attempt to make it digestible. And I have one more handout, and then we'll go back to your question, John. The final handout is all of your, throughout the past 8 weeks, all of your suggestions for revenue that you may have said, well, we should really look into, what about this, what about billboards on 202, et cetera, and the evening where we did some brainstorming, those are all in this document. Now, you might see some revenue recommendations in the ones that I just handed out, but these were specifically points that were made and recorded that we wanted you to have, again, to show that we attempted to capture without losing these pearls. So, I don't want to leave this point.
Well, can we come back to it after the Parks and Rec?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to come back to it after the Parks and Rec. I think it would be a good discussion for the committee to have whether or not they feel that someone not authoring this but directing us or helping us come to a consensus who's part of the committee might be a valuable thing.
Joan, might you be willing to withdraw your motion pending that discussion and then bring it forward again at the discussion?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. We can talk about it after Parks and Recreation.
Okay.
This is Mike Kiak. I'd be interested in having that.
Pardon me, sir?
I'm sorry.
I'd be interested in having that discussion too at some point.
That hasn't been had with you yet. Huh? At your place are the Q&As from the past week. Note that they were not posted today. There was really a ton of work to do to get ready for tonight, and they were not posted. They will be posted by tomorrow morning. Tonight we're going to talk about Parks and Rec. Is there anything from last week that you'd like to comment on before we get into the agenda and approve the minutes and so on and so forth?
I guess just one comment. I know that the city's got a business, or the business of the city needs to happen. This is Mike Kiak, and I guess I can't emphasize enough, personally, the amount of information that's come at us. I mean, we made a request and we've got information coming at us. But I know that takes time. It takes time away from the business of the city and everything else that comes with it. It's more things to add on the list of things for people to do from a staff point of view. But just like all of the financial data from last week, I mean, that was tremendous in terms of helping us make what I consider important fact-based decisions about what's going on. I personally just want to express my sincere appreciation for staff, for what they've done to try to collect the information and help us just kind of wade through all of this stuff that we've seen for the last couple of weeks. So, no thanks to the city staff.
Thank you, sir. On the 24th, with your permission, I'd like to add one brief item to the ballpark discussion, then subsequently increasingly more of your open forum with yourselves. And that's the city manager will be presenting the budget cuts on the 22nd. He has said a number of times through this series that he couldn't share with you those budget cut recommendations. His responsibility is to share those first with the council, and his obligation to bring forward a balanced budget. Those are going to be shared on the 22nd, and then he will present those to you on the 24th. Is that okay to add that in? That sort of completes that loop on those things that you've expressed an interest in. We also will have for you, you'll get this, we'll get this, we'll post this online, and perhaps you can download it and then work with it yourself. We're going to send you a listing of all of the divisions that you have had present to you. So within each department, there's a number of prime divisions, so it'll be a significant list of services provided. This will be the prioritization component of it, so you can take a look at those. Some of your comments are very specific to items that could be attended to. We also want to make sure we understand your prioritization and what you see as the priority of ranking of the different services provided in the city. So you will get that, and that we ask you to, as you've done so far, and we appreciate, I think we've got 18 or 19 feedback instruments in the past week, which is very, very good. We'd ask you to do the same thing with the prioritization. That's not a financial, this is just your sense, having seen all these presentations, a rank order. We'll get that to you. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Recreation for their presentation this evening. Before we do, I don't think that's me. You hear the mic noise. Is there another mic? Eddie, is there a mic somewhere else that might be rubbing against something? No? Okay. Maybe it is me. Okay. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening, folks. My name is Mike Svets. I'm the Director of Parks and Recreation for the City of Goodyear, and appreciate the opportunity to present to you. I know that you have much that you would like to discuss after this presentation, so I will move through the slides as quickly as possible, and please feel free to ask any questions, concerns, comments, suggestions you have throughout the presentation. First off, just a little bit about me. It's my 19th year in Parks and Recreation, all in public service, the last 10 years as a director. And I arrived in Goodyear on Groundhog Day in 2009. For about that first month or so, it was very much like Groundhog Day because spring training was going on, but it has been anything but that since. I've earned bachelor's and master's degree from Miami University in Ohio, and I've had quite an expansive experience in Parks and Recreation, dealing with large community recreation centers, golf courses, cemeteries, outdoor pedestrian malls, very similar to the plaza area that was proposed as part of City Center, outdoor aquatic center, skate parks. I am currently a member of the Arizona Park and Recreation Association and the National Recreation and Park Association, and I have served on the board of directors for 2 state associations in Ohio and Virginia. Tonight, again, very quickly, the overview. Mission, structure, core service overview. I will break the presentation up into parks and then recreation, and then obviously answer any questions you may have at the end. Mission statement, very important and integral to Parks and Recreation, to enhance the quality of life for all through the stewardship of public land by sustaining exceptional park facilities and quality recreation programs and services. Very simple and to the point. Parks and Recreation depends upon many other city departments, and other city departments do depend upon us, and I have listed a couple of these up here. The work chart, on the right you see that Parks is a maintenance operation. It is strictly very much a task-driven, planned, but also reactive maintenance operation. And we perform work, facility grounds such as fire stations, community parks, neighborhood parks, right-of-way landscaping, and special use parks. Recreation provides services and programs within those parks. Since the City of Goodyear is very limited in terms of the number of facilities it has, pretty much a community center at Loma Linda Park and a pool at Loma Linda Park, the maintenance and management of our park system is very integral to our recreation programs, since that is where most of our recreation programs are held. We do adult programs, youth programs, senior programs. We also deal with public arts, special events, and aquatics. An org chart, very simply, I know it's not very easy to see. We have one administrative assistant for both the Parks and Recreation divisions. We have one combined position on the superintendent side with Parks and Recreation, and then we do have some mid-level managers. But for the most part, Parks and Recreation is made up of worker bees, people that coordinate programs and people that are out in the field actually maintaining our public spaces. Reductions since actually as of March 1st, 2010, we have reduced a total of 6 positions, 1 on the administrative side, 4 on the actual park worker side, and then 1 on the recreation side. That recreation position was transferred to the ballpark to take advantage of that individual's event planning expertise. It was a position that was going to be filled in the ballpark, but instead of filling that and keeping the position in recreation as part of a budget, actually I think it's more of an efficiency opportunity, we just simply transferred that position to the ballpark. Parks Division. I'll run through this very quickly. Again, community parks, neighborhood parks, right-of-way, median landscaping, and I'll stop there. Community parks and neighborhood parks, there's a big difference. Community parks are where we do formal programs. Goodyear Community Park, Estrella Foothills Park are examples of those. Neighborhood parks are where we don't do formal programming. Parks such as Canada Village, parks such as Loma Linda, with the exception of the pool, Parc de Paz and Palmatier Parks are examples of those. Right-of-way and median landscaping. Arterials and collectors, Litchfield Road, McDowell Road, anywhere on a right-of-way that you see landscaping that does not back up to commercial property, the city is responsible for maintaining. Not just the plants above the ground, the trees above the ground, but also the irrigation system that you don't see that waters those plants and trees. Medians on all arterials and collectors, regardless of whether or not they are in residential or commercial areas. City facility grounds such as fire stations, water campuses, public works facilities, we are responsible for maintaining the landscaping in those areas. And special use facilities such as splash pads, skate parks, and also lakes that we do maintain throughout the city. Rio Paseo is one of those lakes that we do maintain. Very difficult to read, but a very quick snapshot of the parks and how spread out they are throughout the community. We do have many neighborhood parks in the central area. It is the one area of the community, though, that we do not have what we would consider to be a true community park. The work that we perform, the core functions, again, this is either the maintenance or management of public lands, and these are the areas that we deal with. Turf, irrigation, custodial services, arboreal management, which is basically trees and shrubs, lakes, athletic fields, playgrounds, general park amenities, benches, fencing, lighting, you name it. And then we also deal with contract administration as well as plan design. Next. Oops, one too quick, sorry. This is how it's broken out. Community parks, we have 2 crews, 5 total staff. Neighborhood parks, 2 crews, 7 total staff. Irrigation, 1 crew, 2 people. Right-of-way and median landscaping, we have 2 crews, and those basically, we have 2 staff associated with 2 crews, and the makeup of those crews is a Perryville prison work inmate program. And then administration, and when I say administration, this is where these people's salaries come out of, the director, the parks foreman, and the administrative assistant. This is a slide you saw a couple weeks ago in regards to park developments. 7 of these developments are directly related to work performed on the Parks and Recreation side of the business. Very quick budget breakdown. $2.675 million is what was adopted last May, June by City Council. 49% of that is made up of personnel, but it does not reflect the reduction of 3 FTEs since August of 2009. Materials, which is the same as commodities in your budget, contracts, and then utilities. I broke that out special. It is a part of contractual services, but I thought it important to note that it does make up a significant portion of our budget. And moving to the next slide, you will see...
Sorry,
Yes.
Howard Broadbeck. Before we go to the next slide, Larry Lang gave us some data last week that shows that Parks and Recs in the 09-010 first 6 months, you spent $1.7 million, which is a run rate of about $3.4 million, versus what you're showing here is a $2.7 million budget. Is that... Are we missing something here?
You may be missing aquatics and recreation divisions. There are 3 different categories that make up that budget.
He's got Parks Admin, Recreation Aquatic, and Recreation Admin.
And then there is the aquatics budget. That's also not a part of that.
That's not part of the Recreation Aquatic
Admin.
facility?
It's not a part of the recreation admin.
You know where that appears?
It should be in there. I apologize, I do not have that in front of me.
Well, what I'm saying is his numbers are higher than what your budget is. His run rate numbers are higher. So if you're saying there's stuff that's not in here, that would make...
Howard, can you please repeat the question for me? I'll see if I can decipher it.
Larry reported to us last week that through December 09, which would be the first half of the 09
Correct.
2010 budget period, which is what I presume you're referring to here.
This is just the Parks Division. This is not Parks, Recreation, and Aquatics.
So this is just Parks Admin?
Correct.
Okay, so in addition to Parks Admin,
There's another $1.16 million in Recreation and Aquatics.
okay.
The utility costs, you will see, have increased over the course of 2006 to 2009 by 59%. That is significant and is a direct result of all of the park development and or street development that has taken place over the last 5 or 6 years during the building boom. Couple of work trends. Right-of-way, which I talked about before, has increased 48% in terms of what we have to maintain square footage-wise. A little slow, I do apologize.
Mike, Howard Broadbeck again.
Yes.
Okay, in the CAFR, which is the consolidated annual
Correct.
financial report that the city produces every year, they show that in 2006, Parks and Recreation had 106 million square feet of medians and right-of-way maintained, and in 09, 115 million, which is about an 8% increase. Why is that so different than what you're reporting here?
This is the actual data that we have in terms of developed area that we maintain. There is likely a total number of area in the city that we do not maintain that may be factored into that.
Well, this is under the listing, Parks and Recreation, number of square feet of medians and rights-of-way maintained.
Howard, this is the data that I do have in front of me. This is what we work with every day. I will be more than happy to reconcile that data with finance.
Okay.
But this is the data that
They're showing that you're, in this particular area, your workload is only up about 8 or 9%, not whatever you just quoted, 48%, 95% increase.
Okay. I will be more than happy to share that data with you in detail. The Parks Ground and Open Space acreage, we have shown a 95% increase in acreage that we have to maintain, from 148 acres to 288 since '06. little slow. Irrigation miles, this is what I referred to earlier, 945 irrigation line miles in '06, 1460 in '09, 54% increase. And then just to dive into some of our fiscal efficiencies, we've developed a strategic plan. Over the last year, the Parks Division has worked very hard to develop standard operating procedures, and what those standard operating procedures are is basically how we perform our work. The park maintenance standards is the frequency in which we perform that work, and then as a result of that and the correlating funds that we are associated with, we are able to develop cost per acre to maintain parks, cost per acre to maintain square foot of right-of-way. Improvements to Goodyear Community Park, we have increased the size of the skinned infields so that we're able to hold baseball tournaments that require 70-foot bases. That work costs us $8,000, and we expect to generate $15,000 the remainder of this fiscal year in tournaments associated with that improvement. We have frozen 3 positions worth $148,000 since August of '09. Green waste disposal program, that is an agreement with Hickman's. They basically will provide us with roll-offs. We're able to dump our green waste in them. They will take it away free of charge. And as a result, we will save ourselves about $10,000 annually on dumping fees. Implementation of irrigation efficiencies, we've actually been able to reduce our water consumption by 5% as a result of those those efficiencies that have been implemented. Perryville Inmate Work Program, this program has been in existence for a number of years, but as a result, it saves us about 4 cents a square foot versus contracting it out. It costs us about 6 cents a square foot on the Perryville side versus 10 cents contracting it out. Bulk purchasing of chemicals will save us $5,000. Elimination of ryegrass overseeding will save us $33,000. That basically means we won't have green grass 12 months a year. We've updated landscape standards so that we can identify consistent irrigation controllers. We currently have 7 different irrigation controllers throughout our entire system, 205 controllers outside of Estrella Mountain Ranch, and unfortunately 177 of those controllers are maintained manually. In other words, they have to be programmed manually. We do not have any automation to them. Adopt a Park program, which HR touched on, as well as Make a Difference Day programs. And then coming up, we have an opportunity to secure $228,000 in community development block grant funding, which will allow us an opportunity to improve both Parc de Paz as well as Paul Matier Park, hopefully making our, as a result, making maintenance more efficient. We are going to conduct a Loma Linda Park master plan for purposes of identifying renovations that hopefully later can be implemented as a result of CDBG funding. Replacement of playground surfacing. The sand that we have under most of our playgrounds is not ADA accessible. We need to bring that up to standard. It also is a real difficult maintenance operation, both in terms of picking up trash as well as the labor associated with raking it out. Community garden project at Parc de Paz, and a significant project that hopefully will reduce our water bill even further in the neighborhood of $37,000 to $50,000, depending upon what rates happen, utilizing free remediated water, groundwater for irrigation at the Goodyear Community Park. Any questions on parks? Yes.
On Larry Price, do you have an estimated annual cost of your right-of-way, landscaping, maintenance, water, electricity?
Yes, I do. Hold on one second. I can tell you that the contract work that we perform is divided up into 2 funding sources. $300,000 comes out of the general fund, and another $350,000 is able to be charged back to the CFD, and that is the area north of I-10, the Palm Valley area.
So total city is about 650, and then the CFD pays 350 of that.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Barry Hamp. On I guess it's slide number 18, you talk about parks, grounds, and open space acreage. There's a big increase of space that you're taking care of, and being relatively new, can you just kind of tell me where all that extra acreage came from?
Absolutely. Bullard Wash Phase 1 and Phase 2 are about 60 acres. Falcon Park is about 15 acres. Foothills Community Park is 17. Goodyear Community Park is Phase 2, 14 acres. The RID Park off of McDowell, near McDowell and I want to say Pebble Creek Parkway, that is 14 acres. Rio Paseo Park, 14 acres, and Roscoe Park Phase 2 is 1.5 acres. We also have increased the number of facilities that we maintain, fire stations, water admin building. That's a small total of about 5.2 acres. And then we also have an additional, I want to say in the neighborhood of, if my numbers are adding up correctly, that's approximately what we have. About 135 acres in parks, 5.25 acres in facility grounds.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on parks? Recreation Division. Again, recreation is about providing programs and services. It's probably going to flip ahead like 15 slides in a second. Okay, there we go. Again, youth sports, adult senior sports and enrichment programs, aquatics, small special events, facility field rentals, public art, and of course customer service. And a pause. Staffing, total of 5 full-time staff make up the recreation division, and one of those is public art, and one is the administration, and that is the combined Parks and Recreation Superintendent position. Budget breakdown, very simply, 65% of it is personnel, and of that personnel cost, $283,000 are part-time staff. That's umpires, instructors, customer service folks that we have at our desk, folks that assist in the office as programs ramp up, lifeguards, aquatics, water safety instructors, a number of hours put in for part-time staff. So recreation is very heavy in utilizing part-time staff, and given the fact that programs happen evenings, weekends, summers, year-round, it's very, very critical to our operation. Technology is great when it works. There we go. This is a question that was asked early. Residency participation in our programs, about 69.5%, 70% are made up of resident participation, and the other 30 are made up of non-residents. And then in order of popularity, and when I say I don't want to say popularity, I want to say actual program participants. Popularity is a little bit different, and it's driven by the ability to be able to have facilities to offer programs. So what I'm going to do is run through the different program areas and give you them in from highest to lowest in terms of participation. 90% increase on the special events. We've actually had a 2% decrease in aquatics. And the reason that we've had a 2% decrease in aquatics is simply the fact that we have, due to budget cuts, reduced the amount of open swim that we have made available. Fortunately, our open swim has decreased by about 18%. The number of hours that we have decreased the open swim at Loma Linda Pool has been 19%. The fortunate part about it is our pool rental participation has increased 800% over that time. Adult sports, senior trips, yes.
Larry Price again. Can you talk a little bit about the city has one pool that it operates. You're talking about Loma Linda Pool here?
Yes.
The city also has an agreement with the YMCA with that pool up there. We contribute to offset some of those operational costs, and do we get to use the pool for any?
Yes, I mean, we utilize the times in which we don't operate Loma Linda Pool. Loma Linda Pool is a pool in which we only operate during your traditional summer swim season, Memorial Day until about the time kids go back to school. We are able to use the YMCA pool for such programs as dive team or lifeguard training off season. The YMCA does offer discounts to Goodyear residents, participate in programs as well as join the YMCA or come in on a daily admission. When I first arrived, I think the total subsidy was about $245,000. We were able to reduce that last year, though not a significant amount, but able to reduce it to about
$238,000, Our participation, Goodyear's participation, is just a portion of their pool costs. It's not their total costs.
Correct.
They're paying part.
The way the agreement works is that the YMCA and the city knew going in that the pool as a standalone operation would operate at a deficit. So the city agreed to cover the first $150,000 of basically loss out of the general fund, out of the Parks and Recreation budget. Anything above $150,000, the city splits evenly with the YMCA. So in round numbers, basically the YMCA operates that pool at a deficit of just over $300,000.
City residents who want to go into open swim, they can show some discount off of the daily rate.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, the YMCA is very trustful and honest with regards to that. I mean, anybody under driving age typically is not carrying an ID, so they really do go on the honor system. When it does come to like signing up for a membership, they will require a utility bill to verify that, and they do that as well with some of the programs. But if you're just going in to use the facility on a daily use basis, it is on the honor system. Has to be. There's no other way to do it.
Does the city still have any type of relationship with the Boys and Girls Club in Avondale?
If I'm not mistaken, the city does provide some funding through the community funding program for the Boys and Girls Club, and I do apologize, I don't have that number off the top of my head. The Boys and Girls Club is located in Avondale, as you may know, Larry, and the city has worked with the Boys and Girls Club over the last couple of years in terms of sharing supplies and resources associated with day camp programs, but that really right now is the extent of our partnership. It is one that we could potentially expand. Adult sports, senior trips, 24% increase in participation. It is certainly not due to a lack of demand. It's certainly due to a lack of facilities and fields available, or that number would increase. We have to obviously balance youth sports and adult sports in sharing those facilities. It's impossible for us to run an adult softball program at the same time we're running Little League program because we just don't have enough fields. Youth sports has increased 80% over the last 4 years. And then, yes.
Mike, sorry. And go Redhawks. I have to ask you these questions, okay?
That's fine. I'm good.
If I look at the last
When I was there, it was Redskins.
well, the year before my daughter went there, it was too. But the last four slides that you showed, 30,
Yes, sir.
29, 28, 27, I want to make sure I understand this. If you add up the participants You got 34, about 10, and then another 6. So it's about 50,000 participant events. That's participant events, right?
Our number of program registrations and/or individuals that participated in a special event in which it's free of charge.
Okay, so it's mixed. It could be an individual who participated in something, and it could be an individual who had participated in an event.
Correct.
Or if that's the total of every event.
The 49,347 that you're referring to are individual participants that have either signed up for a program or have participated at a special event such as fireworks or a movie in the park or a dry heat comedy night.
Okay. And that's the recreation division.
That's the recreation.
And the parks division, you don't have any data that tracks people who use that as well, but that would be in addition to that.
Exactly. It's impossible for us to track informal use of our parks,
Right.
Neighborhood parks, community parks, people coming to watch somebody participating in a program.
Okay.
So these numbers are just reflective of what we have in terms of registration numbers. Correct.
Okay, and just for clarity, that actually tracks pretty well with what the CAFR has reported for Parks and Rec. They show that in '06 there were 46,000 number attending, and in '09 51,800, which I guess is slightly higher than what you've reported here, but there might be something that you've omitted.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, and the one thing I'm not sure of is what made up that number in '06. There may have been estimates associated with the total participation that you referred to, the informal use of somebody coming to watch. There could have been an estimate associated with somebody using a Ramada rental or so on and so forth. So the data I'm giving you is as I explained it.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Yes.
Barry Gelzer. Are the participants, if somebody participates in a softball league and registers one time, are they counted as a one-time use, or are they counted for the 10 games that they play during the season?
That's an interesting question, Gary, and thank you. One of the things we want to move to is not just measuring the number of participants that we have, but measuring the number of participant hours. So when you refer to somebody signing up to be a part of a softball team, we are counting them one time. We're not counting them the 10 hours or 10 different times that they're coming to use the park to play their 10 games as part of the season. But one of the drill downs that we want to get to is what does it cost the city and what does it cost the participant to basically register for our programs on an hourly basis.
And there are one-time events where we have attendance, and then there are programs where people participate two through 10 times, and they still only count as a one person.
Right.
We have several of those.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
thank you.
I think a truer, better understanding of the use of our parks and the programs that would provide are the participant hours. We're not there yet in terms of developing that performance measure, but that is something that we're moving in the direction of doing. It gives us a real better understanding of how much things are being used, especially when you start relating it back to the park maintenance side of things.
And, sorry, one other question. When you divide this by Parks Division and Recreation Division, are some of the parks facilities being used by the Recreation Division?
Absolutely.
They are. Okay,
Yes.
so if you were to look at what's the cost per individual of using the recreation facilities in Goodyear, you could use the Recreation Division's $1.2 million, but you might want to add a portion of the Parks Division expenditures to that.
Right.
And like a capital charge.
And through the user fee study, and again, through the user fee study we did, and I do have that later in the presentation. I don't have that specific data, but just to kind of give you a preview, there's probably about 40 to 50% of our parks maintenance operation budget is related to putting together the programs or maintaining parks so that a program can be held there.
Right. I'm guessing maybe some other people have started doing the math. From Gary's question, maybe he has. But if you just take this $1.2 million budget, subtract out the revenues that you report a couple pages later, right, which I assume are attributable to that. Now, this doesn't give any capital charge to it.
It does, well, I want to say capital. It doesn't deal with park maintenance, correct?
Right. So there's some extra. But if you just use that amount and you divide it by the 50,000 users, which, as Gary points out, that's not per event. That's the individuals who used it.
Correct.
So you could go to a softball game 10 times and it only counts as one of the 50,000.
Correct.
So if you divide 50,000 into about $1 million, it's about $20 per head, per
Correct.
person. That would cover the entire recreation division expenditures if they increased per person their collections for using these facilities. Does that seem to make sense?
It is fair. And I actually do have more on that later on as we get through the presentation. And I love to engage in that conversation at that point. Just real quickly on the Ramadas, though, and this kind of goes to Gary's point, these are the number of the actual rentals that are processed. Again, it's very difficult for us to gauge the number of people that are using an athletic field or a softball field or a Ramada or a community center rental at any given point. One of the things we will start to do is to ask people for an estimated attendance for each of these so we can correlate the number of rentals processed versus the number of people that are actually using the facilities as part of our rentals. The 422% is just simply because we have so many more, for example, Ramadas, 12 more Ramadas or shelters for those of you back east that people can go and hold birthday parties at or family reunions at. And that, as well as the additional athletic fields that we do have resulted in the number of rentals being processed being much higher in '09 than they were in '06. Public art projects, a program that was started in FY '07. It started in the Community Services Department, since transferred to Parks and Recreation. A number of projects put forth have been 6 each of the last 2 years. This goes to a question that was asked earlier, and I think this kind of starts getting into the dollars and cents. For every $100 that somebody were to pay for a program, the city is picking up 70% of that cost, and the participant is picking up 30%. So in layman's terms, our cost recovery is about 30% at this point. User fee revenue, we have increased that by 105% over the last 4 years. Again, it dives into 30% cost recovery. This kind of is a repeat of the slides that Larry presented before about the user fee study. And again, this kind of dives into some of your questions, Howard, in regards to why, it's easy to say let's just tack on $20, but there are some additional factors that kind of go into the whole issue of setting prices. One of it has to do simply with program cycles. There is not a program in this world that is consistent and constant from year to year. They always have an ebb and flow to it. There are new programs that are on the pilot side of things in which you want to try and generate interest because it's a new program, so you'll price that a little bit lower, and you'll do the same thing as a program is phasing out. When a program's at its peak is when you obviously have the most amount of demand, and you have an obvious opportunity to quote unquote cash in on it. So the elasticity of the market is one. The other is just simply the fact that in this area, in the valley, recreation has really been provided as a social service. It's never been really looked at in terms of revenue generation or truly trying to capitalize on user fees. And so when we do the user fee study and you compare against your benchmark cities, we're right in the ballpark in terms of what we're charging for a swim lesson or for a softball league program or for a team entry. And so if we put ourselves in a situation where we're the highest going, there are other opportunities in Litchfield Park Peoria, Surprise, that people will gravitate to just to save a little bit of money on those registration fees. The interesting thing about adult sports, it's never 100% Goodyear resident.
What happens if you lower your fees then?
If you lower your,
You're going to see the same reaction on the other side? You'll get all the Litchfield Park people coming over here to...
but we don't have the facilities to be able to run the programs. That's the other factor is if you don't have the facilities, you can lower your fees, but you're still going to keep bumping up against what your maximum capacity is because we don't have the ability to do that.
So are you saying you're currently at maximum capacity for all your facilities?
We are getting very, very close, in particular on the youth sports. If you think about our indoor facilities, we only have one, and that is a community center over at Loma Linda Park that maybe houses about 50 people. We do work through IGAs with the schools to try and generate more opportunities for indoor programs, but there's always a cost associated with those, and scheduling is very, very difficult simply because the schools always have first priority for those evening and weekend programs. Makes it very difficult to have a consistent program when you can't have a consistent schedule. Yes, John.
John Schild, I find this, it really doesn't have too much to do with you particularly, but the philosophy. The philosophy of not raising user fees for fear people will go somewhere else and use their facilities and move away from using Goodyear's. But you do not have that philosophy when it comes to raising taxes.
I don't know that we're not saying that we're not going to raise fees. We are, as part of the user fee study, we are looking at where we can generate revenue, where we're not generating revenue now. And one of the areas has to do with special events. For example, we do not charge for any of these 3 large special events an admission fee. And what we have proposed to try and generate some revenue is to charge an admission fee. The one thing about these 3 special events that you see up on the screen is they are not really 100% Goodyear residents. They are regional events that draw people from outside of the area. Yes, Gary?
I would like to make a comment in rebuttal to Ms. Shields' comment in that the user fee program was presented at a work session to City Council approximately a month ago, and the City Council has not determined what the percentage of the user fee is going to be. This is not a management-directed user fee study. It is a City Council edict on how the fee structure will be. The City Council makes a decision on how they are going to charge the citizens for what they're going to do, and then the Parks Department implements the fee. The user fee structure, and the city has gone through an entire department by department user fee structure that is being presented to the City Council, and the City Council has to make decisions. Part of the budget that the city manager has proposed will enhance the city revenues by somewhere between $350,000 and $500,000 if all the user fees that have been proposed by management are adopted by the City Council. The City Council has the final authority on what the fee structure is. Do not try to blame management. It is your elected representatives who do this and determine it through their vote and through their direction to the city manager.
Excuse me. I was speaking to the analogy that they had no problem in not considering raising user fees, but they didn't want to raise user fees because of the fear that would drive their business elsewhere, but they have no problem in you making any desire to.
Your inference was, no, I'm sorry. Your inference was that management, the city management told the council that they had to raise taxes, and they're telling the council how to raise user fees. The council made the decision on where they're going.
You're out of place.
Community special events, an area in which we can potentially raise some revenue through charging an admission fee. Again, these are currently free, and these are currently regionally in nature in terms of attendance. A recommendation, again, it's similar to a county fair or a state fair in which you pay for an admission fee to get into the event, and then you pick and choose how you want to spend your money in the event, on rides, on food, on raffle tickets, you name it. For example, the city of Peoria charges an admission fee for their fireworks and generate $50,000 annually. There's also other opportunities in which we can potentially try to partner with other cities to do this. But again, I think other cities have cut special events completely out of their budget, and highly doubt that they're going to just all of a sudden find money in their budget to give to Goodyear to support Litchfield Parks residents that show up at our fireworks. So again, this is a recommended fee structure, and it will obviously be vetted by City Council as the user fee comes back to them, along with all the other potential increases in fees later in the spring. We do have a fair share policy. Larry touched on this. In a nutshell, non-residents pay more than residents. That's what it means. Fiscal impacts, elimination of one full-time employee, elimination of part-time supervision at a skate park, reduction in aquatics budget, user fee revenue increase, program participation increase, increase in rentals processed. Online program registration is something that has been implemented, didn't touch on. Normally going rate for online registration is 25 to 30%. 43% of our registrations are taken online. It saves us in the neighborhood of $8,000 annually, because that means we do not have to staff the front desk during those peak times in which people are ready to sign up for swim lessons or Little League or so on and so forth. If we did not have the online registration, we'd have to have longer operational hours and or more staff to be able to handle the registrations that come in, as always, at the last minute.
Mike, this is Mike Yeck. So these are actions you've already taken at this point in time?
These are actions we have taken, and I do have a couple that we are looking to take as well.
So, let me just pick on one for a minute to make sure I understand. Okay, so eliminate part-time supervisor in skate park. So we got rid of a supervisor and we substituted a police officer parked out in front of the skate park. Did we really save anything?
This,
I'm trying to understand.
the police office, they're not there the whole time. It has always been a part of their route. And so in working with the police chief, if we do have issues prior to when we had supervision, the police were called to deal with it. Police has made it a part of their route to check and see what's going on at the skate park, no differently than they do at any other park.
I've been to the park a couple times with my daughter, and every time I've been there's been a cop parked out front just sitting there. That's why I'm just curious.
Yeah, they're not there 100% of the time.
Okay. Sorry, thank you.
Sure. Formation, yes, sir.
That's the reason. That's
Do you have a GPS tracker?
Scott
Keep
Mikes.
going, Mike.
I had a question. The implemented online program registration. Did you say 800,000 estimated at savings? Or what was that?
No, 8,000.
Okay, I was
8,000.
All right. When you said 43% taken online, is there a way that you guys can see to increase that dramatically? Like, going as far as getting the word out to get, like, I don't know, 80% goal. Do you guys have a goal to transition that almost totally to online? I know you can't do it 100%, but
There are certain things we can do. Obviously, we do market that very, very heavily. And again, the normal going rate for online registration is between 25 and 30%, and we're at 43. So we're above the average already. I attribute that to technology-savvy residents in Goodyear. But at the same time, there are certain registration. For example, we always have to verify residency. Otherwise, if we don't do that, then we're basically giving non-residents an opportunity to get resident rates online because we don't have a mechanism through the online registration to verify residency. So we'll continue to move in the direction of hopefully getting more and more people to do online registration, but we'll never be able to get away from it completely. I think Al had his hand up first.
Mike, are they paying credit card, or how are they doing?
Yes.
Can we save money by looking to?
I'm sorry?
Can we save some money by investigating another way?
By not doing credit cards?
Paying your percentages.
Well, I mean,
haven't explored. I don't know.
We do pay a percentage, but I think in the day and age of plastic and online consumerism, the volume of registrations we had if we did not offer credit and debit cards would dramatically decrease, and therefore the amount of revenue we would see would probably be far below than the bank charges we pay back to credit card companies.
Because I hear that, besides PayPal, there are other procedures out there that people claim are as effective, maybe cheaper than.
It is something that we can look into. Our current registration program is set up like most other purchases online. You purchase something and they pay for it with a credit card or a debit card.
You issue like a ticket or something.
Exactly. Yes, Gary.
How do you verify residency? Do you basically go to the finance department and check to see if somebody has a trash account?
No, basically we utilize, we have people bring in utility bills, current utility bills, and then for programs that do have age restrictions, they are required to bring in birth certificates. But once they do that once, they don't ever have to do it again.
Okay, so once you're become a resident of Goodyear, you're always a resident of Goodyear, even if you've left. But we don't have that many people who want to leave.
That is true. I mean, we don't necessarily have the ability to take somebody out of the system.
That's fine.
But you are correct. Fortunately, people age out of programs, which is a good thing for us.
Softball.
We do have a recreation roundtable in which we have established partnerships in which we trade off field revenue costs for services provided to us. Banat Soccer, for example, will run a youth soccer program for us without charging us their administration fee for use of fields. Far West Football does provide us officiating for our flag football in exchange, and these are all one-to-one. So whatever they're going to offer us in terms of value of service, that's the value of field rentals we do provide to them. Again, we developed a strategic plan. Financial assistance started this January 1st with funding that has come from outside sources and $6,000 in the kitty, and we've already used $2,400 of it. And that's gone a long way to helping people who can't pay in these times for programs to be able to participate in our programs. Yes, Al?
So you have a grant program, more or less, or something like that to get.
Correct. We're not in the business of determining what the financial aid is. We have a number of things that somebody can bring in to show that they are receiving financial aid, very similar to, a reduced or free lunch program in school.
They have to qualify.
They have to qualify, correct. 40 developmental assets. Search Institute basically identified 40 assets that make good kids better adults. And we are starting to root our recreation youth programs in those so that we add quality. The utilization of program surveys to really get an understanding of where our programs are at. I touched on partnerships. We have other partnerships. The Art and Culture Commission, the Friends of the Library, Goodyear in Action, are just to name a few that we've really started to enhance over the last year. We are going to implement a program satisfaction guarantee, basically looking for people to know that we offer quality programs, and have done this 15 of my 19 years, and maybe you get 2 people a year that say that they're not satisfied with the program. And typically what we would try to do is then get them in a situation where they try another program so that we have an opportunity to make it up to them. Evaluating and developing pro formas for high-demand programs. Heard it through the citizen survey. After-school programs have an opportunity to engage more kids in programs after school and further get ourselves in a situation where we can start also looking at having a higher cost recovery because people pay for those programs. And alternative sources of revenue. Partnerships, whether it's field fencing partnerships, whether it's special event partnerships or sponsorships, we need to identify other sources of revenue outside of just that user fee to make Parks and Recreation that much more viable. People, places, and experience. I mean, it's really what Parks and Recreation does. Sorry about the Cub uniforms. It's the best picture I had. And then lastly, if you have any other questions, let me know. But Goodyear Ballpark presentation, you get to hear from me again in 2 weeks.
Just Howard Brybeck, here's my takeaway. Tell me if I've got this right. It looks like, again, I'm just talking about the recreation division.
Sure.
It looks like it costs the city between $25 and $30 per person to for the participation, the overall total cost for participation in the programs. You're collecting today about $7 per person in that 350,000, 357,000.
Correct.
And the reason I'm asking is there's been quite a discussion about revenues and
sure.
Revenue fees, so I'm trying to get clear on it. You're saying that where you are today on user fees, you feel if you raised any of them beyond the $7 average, it would perhaps reduce your revenues, not increase your revenue?
No, I think that's too broad of a statement. I think that there are some programs that we will price ourselves out of the market. Swim lessons is a classic example because people will, they can easily go to Lifetime or they can go to the YMCA if we price ourselves out of the market. Adult sports, we do feel that there is opportunity to raise those. Special events, we do have an opportunity to charge an admission fee. Aquatics, for example, admission fee, we can always tweak that. I think, Howard, the best way to describe user fees in Parks and Recreation is we always have to keep an eye on the market and we always have to keep an eye on the competition. And if we continue to put together quality programs on well-maintained parks, then there's going to be added value in which we can build into the user fee. Ideally, where we would like to be as a whole is at a 50% cost recovery. That is about the national average, and that is a goal that we should strive for based on our programs in which we don't have facilities.
Okay, and 2 last quick ones. One is, I'm not going to remember what the one is. No, I'm sorry, it slipped my mind what I was going to ask you. The second though is, your last slide here about sponsorships. Oh, I know what I was looking for. I have data here somewhere about how many parks there are and how many different sites we have in addition to the ballpark. It's like 16 or 17, right?
It's about 17 different parks that we have, correct.
Okay, and then there's also the ballpark.
And that does not include the ballpark.
Okay, so your last slide here, alternative source of revenue sponsorship. Have you ever thought about naming rights for all these things? I mean, especially the ballpark, it's called the Goodyear Ballpark today. Maybe there's somebody out there who wants it to be the Pepsi-Cola Ballpark and would, fund the rest of your programs.
I will tell you this. We have hired a revenue development coordinator. That position does lie in the ballpark. And so and she started in November. She has worked in these type of positions both for minor league teams in Florida and most recently for the PGA. One of the requirements was to make sure that we looked and left no stone unturned in terms of alternative sources of revenue outside of spring training. So naming rights is a great example. A simple thing that we don't do is we don't get a business to sponsor a Little League team. and pay for the uniforms. Something same thing with flag football uniforms.
Right.
It can be big things, it could be little things, but those start to cut into either your need to raise fees to keep yourself at a targeted cost recovery, or your need to raise fees, or your need to just raise more general revenue. Another opportunity is, and Paula and I have tossed this around a little bit, is do we advertise within the In-Focus, or do we advertise maybe within the Recreation Program Guide, no differently than we advertise for the ballpark programs that come out
Right.
At the ballpark?
Are the 16 parks currently named, or are they not named at all?
They're named, but they don't have naming rights.
But are they like after historical figures, or is it
Some are historical figures. We do have a naming policy, if I'm not mistaken, that was put into place a couple of years ago. It did not have any tie back to revenue, but it's definitely something that we can look at.
There's a lot of old people live around here. You know, I might be interested in having a park named after me for 5 years, and then Gary can go spray paint the sign.
Listen, I'm only 41. I don't want to be lumped into that old category yet.
I'm an old person.
But yes, there are opportunities to commercialize our Parks and Recreation system. Absolutely.
I want to buy a seat at the stadium. Can I buy one?
I buy a home plate.
If you buy a seat at the stadium,
Yeah, with my name tag on it. Can I? How much does that cost?
you want a PSE.
Seat license, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you go to Ohio State football games, there's people that have their names on seats because they paid $100,000 a year. Well, I'm not going to pay $100,000 for the Goodyear Stadium, but I might pay $1,000 to have my name on the back of a seat,
Or even a brick in the...
or a brick in the entranceway.
Gary, would that seat be out in the beer gardens?
No, it would be on first base side.
Oh, I remembered my question I forgot. Why is the Miami University graduate wearing an Ohio State colored tie?
My wife thought it was presidential.
You can tell her somebody noticed.
Now, I will wear an Ohio-based tie in 2 weeks, so you can touch on that one then. Any other questions? Folks, thank you very much, and I appreciate the humor. That was good.
Good presentation, too.
Thanks.
Let me ask you one little question for clarification. Sure. If I register for, say, a little league, or to be on a softball team, so that's one. But also within that, I might be counted a second time if I'm counted at an event, or another time if I...
Correct.
Okay.
They are not 50,000 separate individuals. They are the number of people that we have formally registered.
So the actual number would be somewhat lower than 50,000, but it's virtually impossible to understand what it is.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah, but what he's saying is if you go to the aquatic center, that's one.
Yes.
If you
Right.
go to a softball league, that's another one.
Right, yeah.
But you're doing two different things then.
Yes, okay. So 50,000 person experiences. Yes.
No, it's 50,000 persons. Well, you could call it person experience. It's not. He's not counting 10. If there's 10 games in the softball season, he's not saying being in the softball league is 10 events.
That's one.
He's only counting that as one.
Right.
But if you also registered at the aquatic center, that would be one other.
Right.
one.
Right.
50,000 individual registrations.
Yes.
Correct,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm just thinking as we divide it up, it'll ultimately be, if you just took it as a business, it would ultimately be much more than $20 a head, but we don't know what number it is, right?
No, it would be $20 a head additional would pay for
Per
his
experience.
entire budget. Yeah, so
Per experience.
let's say they're
Yeah.
all $7, right? If you're in the aquatics program, it costs you $7 to
Right.
be. I don't know what it goes for 3 months at a time, whatever
Right.
it is. Okay, that experience, if you would be willing to pay $27, and everybody, and we didn't lose any people,
Right.
and the softball league same way, they'd be willing to pay $27 for the softball season. The $1 million would get covered because he's got 50,000 people.
Right.
I know they could be duplicate people.
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
But
So
they're
I
not the
couldn't buy
same
a
experience.
card, in other words. I guess that's, if we were thinking that it's hard to have a card and cover that. It's experience by experience. It's just to clarify the number, yeah.
And I mean, I think it's ultimately why we want to get into measuring participant hours, because it's not really the number of individuals, it's not 10,000 people that make up the 50,000 registrations that really matter to us. It's the number of hours that people participate in programs, which has a factor in terms of maintenance and management, and also how you add and delete programs.
Thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
Whoever brought up the credit card, the PayPal has actually substantially increased the online sales of theater tickets by people who don't want to put their credit card in, go through PayPal, no more expensive to the theater, just as an aside.
So it's cheaper to go through PayPal?
About the same, but it takes away for those people who prefer not to put their credit card number in, they simply pay through PayPal. PayPal pays them.
So it's a good idea to use it.
Very good idea to use.
Glad I use it in my business.
Now, next, you haven't had a chance to go through this information, but you very much wanted to have an opportunity for an open dialogue. So I'm suggesting a way to do that. You've got an hour and 45 minutes. You've got about 18 people or so. You could take 5-7 minutes apiece. In fact, this was one of the things that was suggested last time. Take 5-7 minutes apiece and share your viewpoints with the rest of the committee and begin to at least create the framework for a dialogue that will then get much more specific 2 weeks from tonight. So that's one way to go about it. Another way to go about it is to just start somewhere on that list and work through it, but I honestly think we're not prepared to do that unless you feel differently. Another is we have still, Joan, your viewpoint to know whether you want to bring that item back and discuss that you wanted to consider after we had the presentation. So I want to open this up to discussion. How would you like to begin to spend your time without presentation? What appeals to you? Whoever suggested that we each take a few minutes might speak to that.
Mike, yeah, because certainly I've expressed my opinion on certain things. What we talked about, but I don't feel like I've kind of heard the voice of that.
Right.
I'm not asking. I don't think it needs to be a huge amount of time, but if there's maybe one or two things that people are passionate about, I would like to kind of hear from all. I mean, this is the first time I've seen anything that's kind of collectively represents this group. And all due respect, how can I say this exactly? I'd rather hear this committee.
Absolutely.
Hear you.
So would I. Yeah, so would I. So can we do that? Is that all right, folks? You're willing to do that? Yes.
I think that's a great idea, but what I'd like to also ask is there a way to control the temperature in this room?
I don't know that.
I thought I was just the only one that's cold, but I see Marvin's got a winter coat.
The parka, it's over here, but I don't want to touch it because
we will take care of it.
That's not my skill set. Yes.
Warmer.
You can't hear? Okay, if you would, bring the mics a little closer. You might just slide them over between you there a little bit. But the question was, can we warm it up in here?
I think that's the first cost savings opportunity for us is to
Well, I don't know whether we're turning the air down or the heat up.
heat up.
So,
We'll turn the air down.
turn the heat up, yeah, sure, right. Okay, folks, are you okay with that? Now, if we are, I'd just like to start with Charlie, and we can just go around the table and share a few things that you're passionate about in relationship to this, and that would be great.
Okay, my feeling is, my number one recommendation would be to look at the rainy day fund. In my previous life before I retired, I was the chief financial officer for a city, and we had our rainy day fund, and throughout the state of Massachusetts, every city had this same kind of deal, and it was not a fixed amount. It was always a moving target, and we used it as a balancing act for the budget. And I realized that, first of all, it was 5% which I think is unrealistic at this juncture. I think we could propose that this gets changed. I understand that it requires the charter to be adjusted, and I believe it also requires us as voters to be able to vote on whatever comes before us. But I think if we could focus on that, that could be the one thing that actually could balance the budget. In addition, the amount of money that is sitting in that fund appears to be not working, and I think we could get a better return. I'm sure that the people that are running the city and looking at this are on top of this all the time, but I would like to see this money do better than it's doing. That is my main focus.
Marvin Fair. Basically, my feeling is that I think we have value in each of our city programs, and I would not like to see any cutback or curtailment in any of these programs. I also don't believe that we should lay off any city employees. So instead, I've developed my key recommendation, which would generally save in total nearly $600,000, of which about slightly less than $500,000 would go to the general fund. And that's by implementing a mandated floating furlough of 1.5 hours per week for all employees except for fire and police. In doing so, I would suggest that the city offices remain open 40 hours a week, and departmental employees should rotate their furlough time so as to have minimum effect on the and impact on city offices and departments. And as a result of the city's encouragement in having volunteers, I'm also offering, if this be implemented, that the employees may choose at their discretion to volunteer any donated time in addition to the 38.5 hours that they're paid per week. So that's kind of my focus. Again, I don't want to see anyone furloughed, laid off or lose their jobs.
Greg Hansen, I kind of want to tag on to what Marvin said. I do believe that furloughs is something that the committee should strongly look at and debate. I think there's enough evidence there for possibly 1 or 2 days for all employees to take as a furlough day. I think there's the math there to take a look at that. So I think it's something that the committee should strongly look at. I also think that if the budget's not in line coming up as more data rolls in, I think each department still needs to look at tightening their belt and looking for possible cuts where they can find them. And I think this committee, just by skimming through here, there's a lot of good ideas in here. I don't want to see the city eliminate any more positions, cut jobs, reduce services. I know it's a tough time. I think the city can manage through it. I also don't want to see any more tax increases anywhere. I think everybody's lives were feed out to death and were taxed to death. But I will say, I'll kind of counter myself, the user fee study that was done, I think it has a lot of value and importance. And I think the city should look at possibly implementing some of those as the budget improves, not this year, next year, but 2 to 3 years out. I think that is something that they should look at and gradually increase to help offset some of their expenses. There's also a few little nitpicky things in there. Employee longevity bonus. I'm one of the persons that put this in here. I don't think that should be in there as far for the city. I also think In Focus magazine, just kind of talking off the top of my head, guys, should be cut, and I think they should go to an electronic version. So anybody that wants to sign up, they can go on the City of Goodyear website and they can get that electronically. Okay, so just a few quick ideas.
If I read appropriately, one of the focuses for the coming budget is quality of life. And so I would have a hard time recommending very deep cuts to police or fire protection. I also think that long-term quality of life for citizens of Goodyear will have a lot to do with economic development. So I would hesitate to cut that department because they are the future lifeblood of the city. Now, with that in mind, huge percentage of a budget, 511 employees, would go to personnel. I believe that those who are affected by decisions need to be a part of the decisions. So rather than dictating a furlough here or a day there or a whatever, I think employees have the ability, if they were given a number, I mean, if we can look at recommendations for increasing revenue, look at some maybe definitive things. If I hear someone say no taxes, so if we all decided there would be no more taxes, then you give those parameters ahead of time along with an estimated number, and you let the employees decide how they want to deal with that, or at least give their recommendations. Because rather than a mandated furlough of so many days a week or a month or a year, maybe they would rather restructure several positions to be 7-hour-a-day positions instead of 8-hour-a-day positions, or maybe they would rather contribute more toward their health care benefit, or maybe they would rather restructure vacation days. There are a variety of ways to achieve a goal of less personnel expenditure without eliminating people. It's in the movement of hours and kinds of benefits that they have. So I guess my recommendation would be to work with those people and let them be a part of the decision making and keep morale high, because I happen to agree with what the city manager said, that it's important to keep your employees feeling like they're valued and making your city understand that you value what they do. So try to accomplish these goals without stepping on people. Make them a part of the process.
Al Osorio, I'd like to add on to what was just said. First of all, I don't believe there are any new taxes or increases in the current ones. I do not believe in a reduction of the staff. If there's going to be some changes within the departments that are there, I would like to see the departments themselves work it through as to how they might best contribute to this. And it should not be forever. This is just a year or two. We don't want this to go on after the economy improves. As far as in focus, I'm a believer in digital reading. There's no reason why we cannot have a database of all the email addresses of all the residents who want to get their magazine. It's already created in the PDF format. It could be sent out as an e-zine, and I'll look at it if I choose to. If not, I just delete it. Fire and rescue should not be touched. They do a terrific job of maintaining our safety. Parks and recreation goes a long way to keep the quality of our life. So each department, each presentation has been almost sterling in terms of what they're doing. And so I wouldn't want to pick which one or that one should go. Be like my children trying to figure out which one gets less for Christmas. Because you're all doing a great job. That's why I say keep it within the department. If one department wants to give up a day or take a reduction or generate the accounting of that department, let them do that. I'm a strong believer of consultation with employees. 30 years with the United Federation of Teachers, AFL-CIO. I think if you leave it with the teachers, with the municipal employees, I think they'll come up with an answer. That's just my feeling.
I'm Ed Smith. I have more of a concern of being a part of the community and getting involved. I've waited a long time to do this, but I really like the community, and I think there's a lot of people out there that feel the same. They like where they live, and they would be willing to pay for that The suggestions tonight of buying a seat in the ballpark sounded funny, but that's done a lot of places. So they take more pride, would show up for more games, which would eventually draw more revenue. Naming parks, paying to go to events. I think that if it's it's supporting your community, people will be more likely to do that, especially in economic times like this. Seems like charity always comes through, and that's a part of the charity that people will feel good about. I think that revenue generating is more to look at than tax reduction, because of taxes are going to go up regardless as people increase. Everything else increases. We've increased the number of parks, number of activities, size of everything else. That's going to have to be paid for. It has to cause a tax increase. And I think that revenue generating projects are what we should look at to help offset that, instead of reducing taxes and then having to come back and another time and raising them when it seems like it's always a larger amount to raise them again. So I think a lot of my focus then is more towards getting the community feel the charity towards their community and getting involved in that respect.
Larry Price. I have some specific recommendations that I came up with, and it has to do with the finances of the city. And the first, and these are all interconnected to get the combined effect. And I used the 9-10 budget numbers because I don't know what next year's assessed values or debt service schedules look like. So I went under the assumption that if this would have happened this year, then this would have been a potential impact on the 9-10 budget, just to get a feel for what the numbers really look like. So I would recommend that the construction sales tax that's currently 3.5 be reduced to 2, which is what it was before it went up. And that would decrease construction sales taxes by about $2.7 million in the 9-10 year. Refund the PIC series training facility bonds of $34.4 million with GO bonds of $32.1 million. The city has voter authority to sell Parks and Rec bonds of $32.155. I'd say use all of that. And that would still leave $2.3 million short of the $34 million, so the city could use $2.3 million of its contingency fund to pay the balance of that. And what that would do is basically the city's using general fund excise taxes or sales taxes or general fund revenues to pay the debt service for these bonds for the ball field. By refunding them with GO bonds, then it switches it over to a property tax. Using this year's assessed value and debt service schedule, the property tax rate would have gone from $1.60 to $1.82. Refund the PIC series. There's 2 other PIC series of bonds that the city had issued. There's smaller ones, $2.7 million and $3.1 million, a total of $5.9 million, and that's just refund those with cash out of the contingency fund. That'll save the city's general fund $918,000 on this year's budget. The $34 million that I mentioned before would have been a general fund savings of a little over $2 million. By doing this, by restructuring the debt from an excise tax pledge debt to a general obligation bond debt, and as Larry is saying, this has to be legal. And there's other rules that are in place. Cities just can't refund bonds when they want to. You have to show, at least you have to show a savings if you're going to do it. So, and there's other things that have to be shown, but assuming it's all legal. By doing that, now the council has an option. Just because you sell GO bonds doesn't mean you have to levy a property tax to pay them back. You can use any revenue source you want as long as they get paid. But you have the option of using the property tax. Now they have no option. Now they just have to use whatever revenues can be generated out of the general fund. So by using this GEO option, then as times change, if they want to use construction sales tax to pay the debt and that goes up in the future, then they don't have to levy a property tax. But they have an option. So these ideas all added together, there would be, based on the 9-10 budget, there would be a general fund savings of $3 million, construction sales tax decrease of $2.7 million. That alone, changing the rate, you know, if you can believe what the developers told us. I was on the committee that the mayor was talking about back when we made the change. And if you listen to what the developers said then, by increasing it, it would slow down development. So by decreasing it, it'll encourage development. So the property tax increase, the $1.92 rate, $1.82 rate is still lower than the previous 5 or 6 years or forever since the city had two property tax rates before it went to the $1.60 cap. The lowest it had been before was like $1.95, so it's still historically lower than what it had been recently. And overall, there's a tax decrease because the difference in construction sales tax and the $2 million in property taxes. There's an overall tax decrease of $565,000, which, you know, not too many places can say we're lowering taxes in the economy today. So, and if all of those things are legal, this is not it's not a painful way to get at $3 million in savings for the general fund. If they can take out those, if the council wants to use up all of its recreation GEO bonding ability. The other things working in here, and Larry's going to be briefing the council in a couple of weeks, I guess, is that the assessed valuation of the city, which is what the property tax rate is a function of, is crashing. And he knows what those numbers are for next year, and he's been given a preview of what they are going to be for the following year. And I don't know if the city had any plans on selling any more GEO bonds, but this year and last year, the city levied, with their property taxes, over $4 million that they transferred straight into the water sewer system to pay the debt. So the property tax rate, or 50% of the property tax rate for the GEO bonds, was for water and sewer. Well, they've gone through the water and sewer, or they've gone through the rate user fee studies, and so I'm assuming that the water and sewer rates are going to be increased sufficiently to cover the debt service, or cover that $4 million that had been being paid in property taxes. So this year they levied $9 million in property taxes, or 9.5. Last year is $9 million. So theoretically, their property tax levy will decrease $4 million, and they can slide this other $2 million or so in there, and it still will be less property tax levy next year. But depending on how far the assessed valuation crashes, the property tax rate could still be $1.60 or higher. I don't know the numbers yet, but Larry will be sharing that with council in a few weeks. The other things, as I said before, and I think that I would make it a recommendation too, is that if the city council is going to adopt a budget that is not in compliance with its own adopted financial policies, which is right in the front of their budget book every year, then that should be, they should say, we're going to do it, this is where we're not in compliance, but we feel we have to do it because. It should be out there in the public. They need to reiterate what those policies are, because you hear from time to time, what are other cities doing? How do we compare to other cities? What are good practices? There are 34 good practices in their policies that they adopted back in 1994, even before I got here. And I don't think they've ever, it isn't just recently, I don't think they've ever, any year since 1994, that they've ever been in compliance with all of those policies. But they're sound policies. They have been tweaked over the years to become current, but they should at least be forced to understand why they're not going to be in compliance with it. And I think that's why we're meeting here the last few weeks, is that if they had a state in compliance with their own policies, they wouldn't have a general fund finance shortfall as they're looking at right now. So I would just like that, they could do it. I don't care how they do it, but they should, here's the budget, the city manager has to recommend the budget and he could recommend it to it. It's not in compliance with the following policies because, and they're aware, everybody's aware of it, the chances they're taking by not complying with their own adopted policies.
Howard Broadbeck. The first thing I would suggest is, and for any city employees who happen to be here tonight, this is very important, I think, for you. And that is that for what needs to be communicated to council clearly is that on an operating basis, it appears that the city is operating in a slight surplus. Okay? That is not what this committee was told on the very first night that we arrived here. On the first night we were here, we were told there was a $13.9 million shortfall in the budget, okay, and that there was a crisis in the city as a result of that. Now, after seeing the actual spend, X one-times and X capital that Larry presented at the last meeting and that he presented to City Council today, that shows that, again, X those items, the city is operating at a reasonable level today, and the crisis that was described to us on the first night is of a totally different proportion, in my opinion. So that the recommendation, especially to any city employee, is you need to understand the difference between someone telling you there's $14 million between the budget and the revenues, and the difference between what the actual spend has been and what, through a lot of city employees' hard work, has allowed the city to be at a slight surplus today through December of '09, which is the most recent data we have. So my first recommendation is that any budget submitted to City Council ought to start with the current run rate, actual run rate today, not with any kind of previous budget, today's budget, yesterday's budget, or any other budget. And again, I would encourage city employees to understand what that difference is and call your city councilman and tell them you want any future budgets to be based on what the actual run rates have been to start, not what somebody has submitted as budgets in the past or some other time. Because it's your salaries and it's your jobs that are at risk here. And that's all I'm going to say about that one. The second item is that after listening to the discussions on property taxes and Larry's comments about the risk associated with a decrease in that revenue, I believe that it may be necessary for us to increase property tax rates so that property tax payers' actual bill does not change, but so that it stays level. And I don't know how to do that, and I'm sure Larry Price can describe, or Larry Lang can describe better than I can, legally and financially how you can or can't do that. But I think that's fair to the taxpayers, and it's fair to the city employees that we maintain the property tax bill to someone at a rate that it's been, and not have the city pay the penalty of property values going down. I believe we're in a situation of concern here, so that as a property taxpayer myself, I would agree to that. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, as I've listened to all the presentations and looked at the historical data, there do appear to me to be 4 departments, city departments more than the others, whose spending has gone up at a higher rate than some other departments. And either their spending has gone up or their revenues have not kept pace with the programs that they're providing. And those four, and these are the four that I would propose to City Council that if they're going to look at any, these are the four they should investigate more carefully, would be police, HR, the city manager, and Parks and Rec. And I believe in Parks and Rec, the appropriate way to do that is to do something with revenues along the lines of some of the discussions that we had tonight with Mike. And I think, I got the impression from Mike that he believes that there are some revenue possibilities there. This next one is somewhat minor, but we have all these frozen positions on all these org charts, and I believe that all those frozen positions need to be eliminated, and one reason for that is so that they don't show up in any future city budgets. Okay? So frozen positions should be taken off the organization charts, and again, it brings us back to where are we operating today and how do we go forward from there. I don't believe there should be any other, it doesn't appear to me we need any other tax increases besides the property tax adjustments. And then the last two are combined. One is a more consistent management measurement system. I thought the fire department's presentation that we had was excellent. The fellow, I can't remember his name, but the fire chief who presented it, he had a very organized, and he actually mentioned the name of the management program he uses called the Balanced Scorecard. I don't want to advocate one system over another. I didn't see that promulgated in other departments. And I think that it would be wise for the city to consider a consistent management cost control system going forward. And then finally, the analogy I'll use here is we've had I don't know 27 hours of presentations, and I'll have to say, with the exception of a couple of things that Mike said today, where he brought some revenue ideas and he said maybe there's some other cost things he could do, I have not heard from department heads much around either what they believe revenue opportunities are and cost control opportunities are. My disappointment is that I don't believe the city management has influenced the department heads to bring forward that kind of information to this committee. Now, if that's indicative of the overall attitude in the city, then in my opinion, there needs to be some changes in the city management, because you can't fire the team. You got to look at who the manager is first. Now, if that was done not because that's the attitude, but because this is a potentially cost reduction group here, and the advice was don't bring anything out that you might have to bring out later. I don't know what other reason, but then to me, we need to see, this committee would need to see, or the city council needs to see, and I guess this would be my recommendation to city council. The city council needs to see a change in attitude of the city management towards continuing with the cost reductions that have already been brought out by the city, and promoting those and being on board to do that kind of thing. And I think without that kind of leadership, anything that we do or say, it's just not going to happen.
Well, tough act to follow. Let's see. For me, this is Mike Kiak. From what I've heard so far, I guess I've certainly heard a lot of things that I've believed myself that are very valid points that have come up over the course of the last couple of weeks here. I'm not a big fan of. Just I was thinking, there's a million things we could do, based on my experience in working in industry. But after last week, I was almost to the point of do nothing is the right answer. I mean, fundamentally, the way the financials were unfolding as far as how costs were tracking, yeah, there's challenges, but something's going on. So for some reason, the city is underrunning its budget. So that means either department managers at a department level are doing it, at the city manager, somehow something's going on that's different, that has put the city in a position, at least from what the numbers appear to me, very favorable. And that, initially the number was we have a $3 million problem, and that's what stuck in my head from the first night. So, potential surplus revenue of, in addition to rainy day money is an additional $4 million. Wow, what's going on? I mean, something's happening, regardless of this committee, to help mitigate or resolve the problems. However that's happening, I'm not sure I completely understand the mechanics of that, but I think that's definitely something noteworthy, is that there's clearly something in the way of lessons learned in whatever's happening with this year's budget that I think are certainly pertinent and relevant to making choices about next year's budget. I do believe, and I think it was mentioned, I don't think this is a permanent problem. I don't think it's always going to be this way. I don't think that the economy is always going to be the same. So I'm not sure if I'm really interested in doing something draconian, because I think this is a permanent long-term problem. I do believe that if generally believe there's a possibility that the economy could recover and the city could go back into a growth mode, that doing something that's permanent, long-standing doesn't make a lot of sense if you believe if we're not at bottom, we've got to be pretty close by now relative to the economy. So what does that mean? I guess my take is that I think that whatever action's taken, whether it be sales tax or change in property tax, whatever the case may be, I think whatever actions to be taken should be temporary in nature. So my pet project, from my point of view, is frankly freezing or stopping capital investment. I mean, fundamentally, the day-to-day operation of the city should continue. Clearly, it's performing in a very favorable manner. But fundamentally, let's get down to brass tacks, guys. If we can't afford to buy the new refrigerator, we shouldn't buy the new refrigerator. If we can't buy the new car, well, let's just keep the old one running a little bit longer until things recover. I guess I'm a little concerned about putting the problem on the backs of the employees of the cities that are still here, that are still gutting it out, when fundamentally I'm going to make a choice to defer $250,000 in art projects. Value as a citizen, value as to the community, I got to believe someone who's doing code enforcement for the fire department is more important to me than an art project right now. It's a hard choice, guys, I admit. But as individuals, frankly, I know I'm making those choices in terms of when it comes down to it, what do I really need versus what do I really want? And the one fundamental concept that my parents taught me growing up is that you need to separate needs and wants. I mean, I want all of this to succeed. I want all of these activities to be funded. I want all of the community activities to continue. But frankly, that's what I want. And the difference is, I think that's what we truly need to have to continue to keep the city viable is probably something less than that. Capital projects is an obvious place for me. I mean, fundamentally, if we're operating at or slightly below budget right now, to me, slowing down or deferring capital projects, I'm not saying never spend them or never invest in them. I'm just saying defer or hold capital investment for the time being, to me, represents a viable alternative to give the city greater flexibility, whether from a city manager's perspective or from the city council's perspective. It would give the city overall more flexibility to manage its way through this situation. Secondly, I guess the other pet project for me, or pet area, is the employees. For some reason, the employees are still here, okay? I can tell you, for most companies, the idea of keeping your salaries frozen, increasing your cost of your benefits, or taking benefits away from you, that's a pretty motivating factor for people to go do something else. So the fact that the people are still here, still on the job, and still doing something, despite all of the things that are going on in the economy, despite everything that's happening in the city, I guess my question is what about the employees? I mean, what about the folks that are still here gutting it out, trying to make things happen? My recommendation is that the city adopts some sort of a flex work schedule that fundamentally, theoretically, increasing the hours of operation of the city to, say, 9 hours a day, and giving employees every other Friday off on an overlapping schedule. The concept would be the city would operate at a reduced level of service on Fridays, but still would be open for business, but give greater flexibility to the employees to go do other things with that day. In other words, gee, if I could take Friday off, I could get my car fixed. I could go to the dentist. And hence go have a life outside of work and still increase my effectivity or my productivity during the time I'm on the job, continuing to move the city forward. So my recommendations are, one, cut or freeze capital, and two, for the employees, implement some sort of a flex work schedule. Doesn't sound to me like we've given much in the way of added benefit to the employees for quite some time.
Gary Gelzer. I served in 2004 with Larry Price on that tax committee, and I think Larry led us, because I think he was finance director at the time. And I and a bunch of other people were on that committee. Larry talked about refinancing certain PIC bonds that have been issued, and also talked about the general obligation bonds. And the original recommendation of the committee, if you go back and look at the minutes, was that the property tax rate should be $1.80. Very late at the committee hearings, the proposal to raise the construction sales tax, because this provided one-time revenues, was instituted, and as a result, the committee's recommendation was to lower the overall property tax to $1.60 and raise the construction sales tax from 2% to 3.5%. Well, we've all seen from the numbers where our construction sales tax has gone from somewhere north of $20 million a year to south of $5 million a year. And so I strongly agree with what Larry has said about refinancing the GO bonds and the PIC bonds, and basically looking at the property tax as a stable source of revenue for the city. Second thing that I'd like to bring up is I really do agree with what Howard said about eliminating all the frozen positions from the budget. Frozen positions and not filled positions they don't follow zero-based budgeting principles, and that's a really old concept. I'm sure some people will bring that up and say, "Oh my God, it's going back to the 70s." But when I actually took finance courses and cost accounting courses, I understand how to hide the money. I understand how to move it around, but if the person or the budget is still there, you still have it to operate with. And if we eliminate all of these positions, those positions aren't going to happen again. I've been going to city council meetings for 8 years now, and I have seen city council debate whether we're going to hire 54 people this year or 23 people, and how many are going to be police, and how many are going to be fire, and how many are HR, and which building inspector is going to be. Well, we've wiped those people out, but they're still on the books. And as Howard said, I think we should just wipe them off the books and make the departments justify them again in the futures as we go along. Mike's proposal about capital projects is a very valid one. There are some capital projects that are in the future budget, such as the telephone upgrade system, the 911 system, the radio systems, that just are going to have to be done so that we do that. But the essential capital projects need to be spent. The money needs to be budgeted and spent. The unessential capital projects probably should be delayed. We have not put any money into any kind of depreciation funds for automobiles, for cars, for police cars. Police cars are starting to go over 100,000 miles. Chicago sells their police cars when they hit 120,000 miles. The cars just get beat up and they don't function anymore, and you have to pay more in maintenance after a while. So I think we need to, while we're not funding depreciation at this point in time, we need to really start thinking about how we fund depreciation. And maybe that's where we start taking some of that rainy day money and start looking at putting it back into funding. Okay, a couple of revenue enhancements. I am a firm believer of putting the name Goodyear on any billboard, any sign, anything here in the city. And the city council refuses to allow me to give them 10 more feet in billboard size and get the name Goodyear, and the developer is going to pay more because he's going to have a bigger sign. That's one thing. The other thing is I really believe in electronic billboards. Tolleson, Glendale, Phoenix have all put electronic billboards on city-owned property. We have one piece of prime city-owned property, and that's the Park and Ride that's being developed right now. And I think we should be looking at every piece of city-owned property along I-10 that could take a billboard, and we should just lease those babies out. Some of the city council members believe that when we drive into Goodyear, it's ugly if we have plenty of billboards along. I'm a marketer. I believe in commerce, and I-10 is never going to be beautiful. So let's make some money out of it. Okay, this is a joke. You know, we talk about naming rights, but I really believe in naming rights. We have not named any city of Goodyear Park other than the city, park here. We call it North Park. We were going to name one of the parks after a former city manager. We never got around to doing it. Okay, we need to start working on naming parks and finding people who want to sponsor them. And the joke has been, I jokingly said I'd buy a seat at the stadium. Well, if you ask some of the staff members, for the last 3 years when we've had the city center talks, I have wanted to buy a seat in city council chambers. I will pay $1,000 to have my name on the back of a seat in one of those chairs. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people would like to have it there too. And so I think we need to come up with some real creative ideas to enhance some revenue in this city. So if the ballpark seat comes up, I have my checkbook with me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lulut Clau, and looking at the city current actual expenditure, basically I believe that the city has implemented a lot of budget cut among the departments, and on those budget cut, mostly frozen position and a few other things that has been cut within the budget. So I recommend that the mid-year budget cut for this fiscal year will be continued to become permanent, including eliminating most of or maybe all of the frozen position, because if we're not using it right now, again, I believe Howard and Gary, that we probably shouldn't put those positions in the budget, because if the position in the still in the budget, sometimes we have like a temptation to use those positions. Yes, I want to hire additional position, but if there is no position there, then there is no more temptation to use it. My other recommendation is about some program that can be modified, so, like reducing the bulk trash pickup into once a month. That will save a few $100,000. Again, maybe offering online statement for the utility bills, so we will save some money on the mailing costs. And also, it's an electronic version of InFocus. In my house, I received the InFocus, and I have a mailbox that also received InFocus. So I have two InFocus in one house. So also, I read once a few days, and then go to the trash. Basically, money going to the trash. And then for the revenue, I believe increasing the property tax is not going to affect much to the resident of City of Goodyear. Increasing the property tax is limited about 2%, and the city can only get about $117,000. $117,000. Basically, because of the valuation, and the City of Goodyear's valuation is dropped about 13%, so it might be affect the resident that much. Some of you may, if your property valuation going up, your property tax might go up. But if your valuation going down, you may or may not pay additional property tax, but your rate is certainly going to increase. That's it. Thank you.
Monica Stigler. I've heard a lot of great comments echoed so far, and many of those ideas I agree with. What I'd like to urge us to do as we continue through this process is to think about balance. Oftentimes, cost cutting is the first thing that we all do, whether it's in our personal budgets or with the city budget. We find those things that just really aren't important today. And I think the city manager's office and all the presentations that we've heard so far have shown us that they have instituted several cost-cutting measures throughout the departments, from employees to training to merit increases. So I think we need to acknowledge the cost-cutting measures that have been taken thus far, and also to acknowledge where we are currently at a pretty positive run rate. If we can continue that on, we're going to be in pretty good shape. Another thing I'd like us to do, too, is I think it's been acknowledged that what we're facing is definitely temporary. It is not something that we can't see ourselves moving out of. So the decisions that we make as a city, we need to be thinking about how those decisions are going to play out in the long run. One thing that I can definitely say that I believe is that this era of growth that we've experienced, that all of the cities in Arizona have experienced, is over. We shouldn't be thinking that we're going to be growing in double digits like we have been over the last few years. So a lot of things need to be adjusted. The amount of employees that we have per department, I think, should be adjusted. I echo the sentiments about eliminating positions that we're probably not going to need in the future. And if we do need those in the future, we should evaluate that at that time. Going to specific measures, I think for cost cutting, our quarterly bulk trash collection is a good idea. We don't need to be having twice a month trash collection. Most citizens aren't using that. If there is a need for bulk pickup through the times that aren't scheduled, then perhaps there can be a service fee for that for those residents who require that service when it's not scheduled on a quarterly basis. I also want to echo the sentiment that quality jobs in Goodyear is where we need to be looking. I don't think the economic development budget should be cut. I want to draw your attention back to the SunTech project that we just got not too long ago. That's really positive. I think we should be thinking about long-term growth in Goodyear and what's going to drive more people to come here and live here than other options. And I think the main thing is jobs. We don't have many jobs in Goodyear. Most of the residents are traveling elsewhere. So I think our economic development budget should not be cut further. And in fact, that's one of the biggest ways that we have to generate additional revenue in the city. What I also like to encourage is our lobbyist that we have that's working on behalf of the city to bring in more government, federal funding. Perhaps that person or that team can also look to see how we can partner with private industries in Goodyear. For example, we have Lockheed Martin established here, and they're one of our largest employers. DoD contracting is one funding stream that really hasn't been cut too much federally in comparison to other projects. So what can we do to partner with them and strengthen the programs or the grants or the projects that they're working on, and how can we bring more jobs and dollars into Goodyear that way? So another thing that I heard that was really attractive is having a job training program as an incentive to bring SunTech here. But what else are we doing to train people in Goodyear to take jobs that we're hoping to attract? West Valley Hospital, for example, they're another large employer here in Goodyear. Where do they go to get their new recruits, and how can we be a more intricate part in that process? And I think looking at the different types of sectors that we want to bring into Goodyear, what are we doing now to make sure that our residents can take those jobs and fill those jobs when they are here? I think the cancer center treatment is another good area. They brought over 250 jobs to the city. Do we have residents that are able to fulfill those functions, or are they going elsewhere and bringing people in who perhaps don't live in Goodyear and don't contribute to our economy? So those are the kinds of things I'd like to see. I've heard a lot of cost-cutting strategies, which I think are good. I think there's room for more. But I'd like to focus on revenue generation and thinking about what our city is going to become in the next few years.
Barry Hemp. Well, I've got to thank some of you guys. Some of you guys have some great skill sets, and I'm really glad that you're here in the room because you really help me so that I don't have to try to articulate the things that you already have. Larry, thank you very much. The work you did and the explanation you gave for what I call restructuring debt, which is about as much as I understand about it, to be real honest with you, makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think it's important to do things that affect employees, stakeholders, whatever you call them, those things you do last. And if you can do anything else you do before that is what you should be doing. If we can restructure debt, if we can use contingency fund to roll it over into paying some debt or moving things around, I think that's what we should be doing, and we should be affecting our city employees last. Most notably, in my case, would be fire and police. And I'll tell you where I'm coming from is I am one of those people that thinks that big government is not what we should be doing. Government should provide protection. That's one of the biggest things it should do. Protection and perhaps development. And fire and police, I think, would be two of the areas that I would certainly not be interested in cutting in any way, shape, or form at this point. And doing all other things before that. I think if we are going to talk to the city, the HR department, about any kind of cuts, I think all those departments should be involved. I agree with Evelyn and others who have talked about involving those departments in the cuts and things that will affect them most, given the opportunity to help themselves, to help their business, and government is a business, to help their business. We all have if we have an opportunity, we talk through those things, we find ways to do things, because it's otherwise it's a mandate. Help yourself or we'll help you. And that's just never the best way to do it. So I think I think we'd be surprised at some of the ideas that they'll come up with to make the necessary cuts. They'll be able to do that. I'm really interested in the financial analysis, and Howard is right. We started out with a huge deficit when we started these meetings, and now it looks like we're working with some kind of surplus. Did I understand that right? Yep. And if that's the case, over the last several weeks, somebody's done a heck of a job, with the budget and bringing us around. And if we are, in fact, working with a surplus, then I think somebody is doing a good job, and we should continue to work with that. I think there are a lot of individual things that I could talk about, but most everybody has mentioned a lot of them. I think the Recreation Department did present a lot of things they could do. I would push the Recreation Department to break even. 50% on their fee structure, sponsorships for the rest. I mean, now there's more than one ways to skin that expense. And I know that that's above the national average that you quoted, but if you're doing 50%, can sponsorships do the rest? And I don't know. It's just one way to look at it. Again, being a smaller government proponent, I would, and I'm not sure that I heard all this right before, but I thought that somebody said at one point that we own a fair amount of land, that Goodyear owns a fair amount of land. Should they? I mean, again, my own personal perspective is I'm not sure that government should own land. Their job is protection. Again, my personal feeling. So should that land be sold off? Is this the best time to sell it? No, maybe not. But if you have a crisis you have to deal with, you got to make choices. I have worked with physicians in the past that whine and complain they're not making enough money. Come to find out they have 3 or 4 mortgages and don't want to sell their houses because it's not the right time. It's just nuts. We don't need to have those things, I don't think. I think property tax needs to be on the table. How it's structured, again, people like Larry can help us with that sort of thing, but I think it's something that needs to be on the table. And I think that we should not mess a whole lot with economic development. If we're going to talk about the revenue side of this equation, to hurt economic development would just be cutting off one side of the equation that we really need. And I think the city understands that. They put a revenue development coordinator in the ballpark for just that reason, how to develop revenues. Can those things be done for the city as well? I think there's a lot to be done on both sides, and I think many of you have thought through these things pretty well, and I appreciate what you've done. Thank you.
Scott Mikes, I also agree the amount of stuff. I'm taking notes on everything everybody said. I know it's in the packet too, but it's good to kind of hear those. And I have to piggyback off of Mike. At my first, there is that confusion of the $3 million. I'm a little bit, I don't know if it's my misunderstanding with the numbers and stuff like that on where we really are at, and as far as where we're operating. But if we're in a situation as far as I see that cuts need to probably be made within salaries and stuff like that with the city. I agree with Evelyn as far as incorporating some parameters and having the departments work through it. I know that's worked within other cities. As far as some other things like the user fee increase, I'm for cut in focus completely. It doesn't seem worth it to me right now. cut the bulk to quarter a year that you pick it up. The savings, I don't know, it's $200 and something thousand just to do it to quarterly, and that just doesn't make sense to me to have it picked up once a month or even twice a month. As far as reduced on Fridays, as far as what Mike had said as far as a flex is concerned, I really do agree with that. However, I want to discourage any sort of cuts within fire or police. I agree that there are priorities, and as far as art projects, as opposed to cutting this or that, and the stuff that protects us, those are my priorities. From my limited understanding on the property tax and restructuring it, I agree with it sounds like something's obviously got to be looked at, and maybe that can make sense to me more through more discussion when we put that on the table and really try to gain a little bit more understanding on that. So in a nutshell, those are some things that I would focus on.
Rain Gray. First of all, I'm a little concerned about the budget shortfall versus the current run rate. I know it's being a recurring theme right now, so I'd like to see if we could figure out where we really are today. So if we really are running ahead of schedule or we're running in a surplus, that's fantastic. So if there's efficiencies that the city has made and that's what has brought us to that point, then that's great. So I don't want to see this done on the backs of the employees. I think that the employees that we've already cut several positions, and I think you're right, we need to take them off the books. But the employees that we have in the city, we need to maintain a quality that we're happy with. So we don't want to ask the employees to eat this in furloughs and in lost salary and whatnot. So we need to take that into consideration. Like as Evelyn said, these are real people we're talking about. It could be any one of us at different points in our lives. So I don't want to see that. What I'd rather see is the budget more transparent, so that when we're in a surplus, we understand that and it's more recognized. Also, what Larry was saying, I want to see some creative ideas about how to negotiate our debt and how to work through those types of issues. Far beyond my understanding, but I appreciate what Larry's bringing to the table, because those are the types of issues that I think that can bring us much farther ahead. I'd like to see the department heads look more closely at their programs and see, is there other efficiencies that they can make? Is there things that we can do as a city to be more green, be more effective, and have more cost efficiencies there? I think there's definitely creative ideas that exist in individual departments, and those people who are out there in the streets doing it every day are certainly seeing ways. I know the city that I work for, we talk all the time. Why are they sending us all this excess stuff? We have people squirreling away supplies, for example, and hiding them in the corner. There's savings to be had if we just look into the corners of our city, and I think that's what needs to happen also. Additionally, there's some revenue generating ideas that have been brought up, lots of them on the table. One that is exciting for me is within the fire department is they've developed a wildland program. So I'd like to see them expand on that wildland program. This year is obviously going to be a big brush and wildland season. So that is something that can generate a tremendous amount of revenue, but we're going to need to support that department by making sure that there's no additional layoffs. It's actually an opportunity for revenue generation in a significant way. In addition to the Litchfield Park acquisition for service provision. And finally, again, somebody mentioned the economic development. I'd like to see that be sustained, because obviously that's the future when we talk long-term. And as the economy recovers, that's going to be important for us and for our community to be able to sustain that where we're at. That's all I have. Thank you.
If I could for just a minute, what Larry said, or what Gary said, is what the difference is. What he referred to as zero-based budgeting is exactly what Larry Lang's presentation was about yesterday, as opposed to looking at what was previously budgeted and how far off are we from that, which is what I think we heard the first night we were here. Here's my simple analogy. My simple analogy is what we heard first was going into a car dealer and having him tell you, here's the MSRP on this car, and let's negotiate down from there. Okay? What zero-based budgeting is going to Consumer Reports first, finding out what the cost is to the dealer, and then going in and saying, look, I think a $200 profit is reasonable for you. Let's start negotiating there. That to me is the difference between the two approaches. Sorry.
I agree with Barry in small government. I believe in small government, and I believe that their main job is to protect our border and our safety. The importance of police department cannot be overemphasized. And I believe that it's best to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Who knows what's going to happen with our economy? Looking at it from private sector and not being retired and working, it doesn't look like we have hit the rock bottom yet. And I believe that if we cannot afford it, we don't spend it, whether it's through furlough, closing parks, or selling into a private sector, or a salary cut. And if we have surplus, we save it and not spend it. And I believe that it's important that we look at bigger picture where we can save bigger saving. And looking at Texas or California, California is going broke and about to go bankrupt. Their spending is out of control. But if you look at Texas, they have $18 billion surplus. And I think it's important that, looking at a big picture, if we can learn something from Texas and apply it to our city, that would be a great. And I believe that it would be important for us to possibly look into having unbiased data by hiring a private consultant to compare our expenses to our neighbor cities such as Avondale or Buckeye, not Mesa or Scottsdale, and also compare our city expense per capita and to see if we can find a way to save money.
It's Joan Shield. I think first place to start out, are we in a crisis or are we in a surplus? Because if we're in a crisis, then we need to do a lot of things to tighten our belt. I mean, there should be salary cuts, there should be looked at benefits not starting until after a 90-day probationary period. There should be just all kinds of things implemented if we're in a crisis. If we're in a surplus, then we eliminate capital spending, we stay the road that we're going, and we eliminate all frozen positions, and we continue doing what we're doing, and then we look at enhancing our revenue generating things. So we have to decide. I think it's critical that we as a committee decide where the city is. They don't apparently know when they're giving us two messages. And if we're in a crisis, then we need to look at our manager and we need to look at the management of each department because they're responsible for that crisis. I think there should not be any tax increases. And possibly even looking at rolling back the 0.5%, the 0.5% increase that was taken. I just talked, my friend is a manager at Lowell's, and he said, tell your committee where I used to have 1 or 2 truckloads of merchandising coming down to Goodyear every week. I now have a truck or 2 going every day to Goodyear. That's the revenue we are losing. So, and I think I said all current frozen positions should be eliminated. And and we should freeze all capital expenditures. But I think before we can really do anything and say exactly what we'll do as far as cuts and or development of new ideas to generate revenue, we need to know where we are. Does anybody here at this table know exactly where we are other than what Larry Lang says we're in a surplus? If we're in a surplus, then our whole frame of thinking is different. We need to go generate more revenue. Let's get things going. If we're 14 million in a crisis, then it's deep cuts. We have to do a lot of things, raise taxes, do whatever, but to get out of the hole. And I think that's our biggest challenge right now, is to figure out where we are. Are we in a surplus? Are we in a crisis?
Larry, is it possible, perhaps, for you to respond to some of the questions that are out there regarding money and your presentation? In general, what I heard, see if I can wrap up what I heard at the end of your presentation. As I recall, you said something similar to the fact that when asked if you thought that we needed to make these cuts after we had the run data, as I recall, you said yes, you felt like we needed to do something about that $3 million figure. You felt like it was still real. Did I interpret that right?
No, definitely you interpreted correctly what I said last week with that question. What I said earlier today and what my intent was is the question of the run out on this. We need to look closely at it, and we are working on it, and we will report it back to you how that works and what's in there, and that will be 2 weeks from tonight at your next meeting.
So is your mind changing as well as to how, or how deep a problem we have, or if we have? Is your mind also moving a little, or do you feel that the run is taking us to a position that you already stated, which you feel is we still need to take action toward $3 million?
As I indicated before, I believe we still need to take action, but when I'm saying that, I want to answer that question first. You've got to be able to answer that question, and we're going to bring it back because I don't think without answering that question, and I don't want to predetermine an answer. I agreed with the logic. I said that last week. I do today. What I need to do is be able to go through and run it out for the rest of the year. And if, as I run it out for the rest of the fiscal year, I come up with a discrepancy to the logic, I want to tell you exactly what it is and why. Now, I hope all of you will accept I intend to do that at a fairly large scale. I'm not going to be talking about $10,000 in doing that. And I don't think you want me to.
Larry, I have to ask you a question.
Yes.
Have you ever looked at the data like this before? Because when you presented it last week, it was like this was all new to you.
In government, we manage based upon departmental analysis, and this is not unique to Goodyear, by the way. This is government at all levels, whether good or bad. And we manage to that against a budget, and that's what I was describing, where we get reports at a divisional level that talks about here's what you appropriated, and here's what has gone against that appropriation. And what goes against it is more than the actual expenditures that we're showing. It also includes outstanding encumbrances for purchase orders that we've issued. And that's how we manage. So simply as I look at this, we manage the same concept that you're talking about, but we're doing it at a lower level. The sum of the parts, in my view, should equal the whole. That's what I have to look at and to see, because the logic is there. And we're going to have that dialogue. But no, it is a little different of a perspective to look at, but I think it's a very healthy perspective to look at.
Perhaps I have one other kind of question that's a little confusing to me. I've heard many people around the table talk about hiring a consultant to do an evaluation. And yet I know that I have a notebook at home as big as this white notebook from Matrix Consulting that was a thorough analysis of the management operations of the city and the efficiencies and how that city could be organized or reorganized. Can anyone make a statement about what that matrix report was and where we stand with the implementation of that report? Because I've read figures ranging from $500,000 to $1 million in this year's budget to implement matrix recommendations.
I'm not the appropriate person to answer that.
John, do you know that?
Excuse me, we're working on a summary, and we'll present it to you all.
Okay, and was I anywhere close, like in just knowing if there's numbers in the budget to implement matrix recommendations?
I don't think there are numbers in the budget.
The original report showed like 580-some thousand for this fiscal year on implementation, but
this year. Okay, I'm sorry.
The best that I can tell you right now is, as I recall, the matrix included 280-some recommendations. We have implemented roughly 82 or 83% of those recommendations. We have put on hold many of the recommendations because they were, hire an additional deputy city manager, hire an additional this or that. So I have put those on hold. And then there are others that we still need to work on. One, as I mentioned last week or week before.
Maybe I can use this kind of as an example of I don't really know how to engage in the problem solving here because there are questions that are still out there that would really help me. I wrote matrix down on my particular recommendation because I was under the belief when I wrote it that there was a pretty large sum of money that might be able to be postponed. But yet what I'm hearing you is maybe it's already been postponed. So it's those kind of situations that caused me difficulty in not knowing if it's already been done or it's not being done at this time, and it would help.
And I appreciate that, and I'll get back to you on that. So, thank you.
Go ahead, Larry. Call people.
Right here.
Marvin Fair. Larry, when you do present your data, could you also include the net projected ending balance?
Absolutely.
Larry, I have an email here which I downloaded about in January. It came out of the city council meeting of the 15th of January, I believe. You're quoted in here and everything. I'm not going to go into details. But that's January. We're in March. And it talked about surpluses and 24.1 million and so on and so forth. Has anything moved forward? It's like in military circles, they call it the fog of war. Are we going into that? Are we seeing some things? It's 2 months now since this email.
Are you referring to the $24 million surplus that we discussed in the December audit report?
No, it says January 15th because the Arizona Republic, Eli Arnold, wrote an article on that.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that? I don't know. No? Okay.
No, but the surplus issue, we reported to the City Council the components of that issue. We reported a recommendation also in how that's being used. And as I discussed with the City Council earlier, no decisions have been made on that, nor will be made on that, except through the budget process with the City Council.
That was done in December.
The audit was completed in December. That's correct.
So
and in January, that might have been an article or a
okay.
presentation.
So,
or
but
something.
nothing, as far as I should know, has developed since then.
No, it hasn't changed. That really was, if you will, the beginning balance.
So next meeting, we'll have the final, on the 24th, you'll have the information for us. Is that correct?
That's the information that we talked about at last week's meeting that I briefly talked to the council and the follow-up on it.
Okay, so
that's correct.
And you will also have the information on the 24th of the cuts recommended in the budget for 10-11. It will be presented on the 22nd to the City Council. Gary.
Larry, when Howard asked for the run data, basically, as far as I understand it, and I want to make sure I'm looking at this right, these are the ongoing monthly operating costs of running the city. Is that correct?
The ongoing monthly actual paid costs, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And they do not include the $5 million-ish that we have to pay in interest on the stadium bonds, which we have to pay once a year. Is that correct?
There's the analysis itself simply included the operations.
That's
As
what-
we
that-
roll it back, there gets to be a broader discussion.
Okay, but what I think the committee has lost track of is in our monthly operating scheme, we are running a surplus. But in our annual budget, we are not running a surplus at all because we have a $5 million-ish bond payment that we have to make every year, and we have a couple of other things, and I can't remember what they are, but it's something like there's another $2 or $3 million of...
It's 12 million. There's 12 million additional.
Okay, so when you come back to us, what we want to see is where do we project out at the end of this year with our operational, basically our day-to-day costs, and where are the $12 million that we need to come up with to balance, to look at how much money we're going to pay out at the end of June, at the end of this coming June, so that we know, this committee knows, that either we're going to be ahead $1 million or we're going to be behind $3 million, because this is real money. This is cash accounting that we need to know about. And I think that will provide the committee with a basis of making some serious recommendations. Because we don't, as people have said, they don't understand whether we have a surplus or a deficit. And the projected budget is very different than the projected revenues and expenditures and what we see. And yeah, we have to budget certain things, but budgets are flexible because we're running 10% below budget. And that's because of the way the management has dealt with the situation.
Well, we also have to remember that just because we have a budget and it's in the budget, we don't need to spend it.
So I think the question that, and I don't think we can hit it tonight, Larry, is the term you used in discussing this point was a structural deficit, I think. A structural deficit. I think there needs to be a simple, straightforward explanation of structural deficit.
Thanks, Dick. That's a great segue because that's actually what I've been scribbling down in my notes, is to have a larger discussion about the structural deficit. Goodyear is but one example, I think, of other cities and a state as a whole of a structural deficit. You touched on that very briefly last week. If you look at our state, some would say that we have a structural deficit because we have an over-reliance on sales tax. We decreased taxes during the growth years to a point that was unsustainable, and many other factors that contributed to the type of structural deficit that we're currently in. After we go through some of these numbers and we figure out where we are, I think the discussion about structural deficits and how we generate revenue and how we look at our tax base for a sustainable future is really should be on the table. Because once we figure out how to handle these next few years of trying times, it still begs the question, what do we do going forward? How do we maintain and balance quality of life issues with dollars that we actually have, not what we're projecting to have, not what things were like when we were growing astronomically, but what do we do? How do we grow smartly? And how do we look at maintaining sustainable levels of funding in the city?
Very good.
Yeah, one Howard Broadbeck. Yeah, I just want to repeat my understanding so that you can say whether I'm on track here for what you proposed, what you presented last week. We're running at an operating rate without one-times in capital or interest expense of about $44 million per year in costs. We're operating at a revenue rate of about $60 million per year in revenue. That provides a $16 million surplus on that basis. There's another, and I know you're going to look into all of these, but as of last week, there's another about $12 million of ongoing expenses. Now, these are not capital expenses, and these are not one-times. They're ongoing. You gave us a list of them, but they added up to about $12 million. So if you want to write this down, it's 44 plus 12 is 56. Okay? And since we're operating at a run revenue rate of about 60, that appears to be, on that basis, a $4 million surplus. What you're concerned about is not only this year, but future years, and the structural deficit has to do with the fact that we rely so much on construction cost, construction revenues, and growth revenues that are not necessarily ongoing, that they can be much lumpier than things like property tax and even sales tax.
I don't know that the tail end, I was there until the tail end. I don't think I want to throw out the construction and that part as the cause of my concern.
Okay.
The cause of my concern are certain costs that are coming at us that are increasing, and our ongoing supportable revenues and where they're trending and how the expenditures aren't matching that. And we definitely will go through that as part of the dialogue.
Okay, and then let me just get quickly at where the $3 million from the first night came from. And it's slide number 30 or 36 on page 12 of our thing. Okay, it starts with a $13.9 million deficit in order to balance the budget. Okay, the budget was $73.2 million for the general fund, and subtract from that the $60 million of revenues. Right, same $60 million of revenues we talked about just a second ago. But it's starting from what the budget was. It's not starting from what the actual run rate is, okay, what the city's actually spending.
We'll never spend it.
Which we may or may not ever spend it, so long as everybody's careful not to spend it. As Joan said, just because it's in the budget doesn't mean you have to spend it. I don't know how much of that $13 million is capital. I don't know that. Larry knows that. So how much of it's one-times? Okay, so it started with 13.9. Then there was $6.8 million in reduced expenditures, which I don't know what that is, but it was. I presume that's $6.8 million of expenditures that have already been reduced from the previous budget. And then there's adoption of revenue enhancement measures. I don't know if that meant a new tax or if that means revenues that were already in place. And the subtraction of those is where the $3 million came from. So the point is, the one is a build up from what the operating expenses are, and the other is a build down from what the budget was. You'll have the best information hopefully 2 weeks from now to say how nervous are you about this year and how nervous are you about future years.
Okay. Being nervous about actual costs, being nervous is against budgeted costs. Those are two different.
Yes, really. That's right.
Isn't this fun, Larry? Better you than me. It's on my page 15 on slide 45. It looks like finance made an estimate of the actual expenditures and revenues for this year. And it was total revenue of $60 million, other sources of $7, total revenues and other sources of $67 million, total expenses of $65 million, so that this year's projected savings is $2 million. Then if you flip over to slide number 47, somebody had made an estimate of next year's budget. And we haven't seen that. The only hint we have about that is it said that there was a deficit of $8 million. And of that $8 million, $2 million of that was going to be handled with the excess PIK bond proceeds to pay, it says debt service, so I don't know if you're paying debt service or bonds. And then there's this $2 million from slide 45 from this year's savings, and then the revenue enhancement of $1 million, and so that gets us down to the $3 million. So you're talking from the budget slides, these are from estimated slides. So my question is, have you seen anything through the actual revenues and expenditures through December that you would want to change this estimate on slide 65, where it shows $67 million in sources and $65 million in total expenses of the general fund?
At this point, I haven't, but we'll discuss that 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. I found the go-around really kind of exhilarating. I mean, hearing everybody share their thoughts. Well, you know what we didn't do at the beginning? We didn't okay the minutes. So can I get a motion to okay the minutes?
I move we accept the minutes as distributed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Some of the things I think that you've asked us to do for this next meeting, which will include, again, the city manager's presentation to the council. Certainly, Larry, in a follow-up with answers and perspectives about the budget, end of year, structural deficit, etc. Reconcile the difference between the CAFR and the open budget data that was brought up at the beginning about. It was in Parks and Rec, I believe, to reconcile that. I think some of these are actually covered. Naming rights, et cetera, those really become under the idea arena. There are a couple others, I'm sorry, that I think are built in mostly to that.
Did you have on your list the fact that I think we were going to hear what John was recommending to the city council?
Yes, I did. That's absolutely that's on the agenda specifically, as we mentioned earlier. The one thing I want to mention is just a cautionary note. This is really where the rubber meets the road in these few weeks. And that's why I really did find that exhilarating, as odd as it may seem, in this business when I hear a whole variety of different perspectives thoughtfully presented by a group like this. I actually get a kick out of that. I think it's moving in a positive direction. And I just want to share with you the terribly important component of following the open meeting law. And what this means is you get into this deliberative process, is you can't exchange. You are a quorum. A quorum of this body is whoever shows up. So in essence, like a council has a quorum is 4, so it's customary that if 3 or fewer chat together, that's not a problem. You can't do that. You can't share information electronically with an intent to encourage a position or share a position. That all has to be shared here in the public forum. It is the only arena in which you can interact with one another in an attempt to share different perspectives and influence different perspectives, which are reasonable in this setting. But given the structure of this, please go back and remember that the open meeting law is something that you are governed by as a public body. And so if you would, yes.
We can talk with each other as long as it is under 12, right?
No. Whoever shows up here is a quorum. And so consequently, if the meeting was held and 3 show up, that's a quorum. If theoretically, it would never happen, and it has never happened, but you don't have a specific quorum. So that if you vote on something, it's simply the majority of whoever shows up to the meeting. So you don't have the specificity you might have with a council where a meeting can't be held without 4, a legitimate meeting. A meeting of this body can be held with, theoretically, 1, because there is no specific number that needs to show up before you can hold a meeting and conduct the business that you can conduct. I just wanted to make sure you understand that. And if you want any clarification on it, feel free to discuss it with the attorney. But that's fairly conversant in the open meeting law in the state of Arizona. And it's a cautionary note so we don't find ourselves sideways with that important limitation.
So essentially what you're saying is that no one should send out emails or make phone calls to everybody in the group.
Yeah, that's correct.
Everything should go on within...
Everything. The public should see the deliberations of this body in toto. And that's...
Like jury duty.
It's like jury duty in a sense. You can't talk to another juror about what's going on here. And I don't want to make, I'm not trying to make something out of nothing. This is the open meeting law, and it's a point of vulnerability with groups unless they're very clear on what it is and stay away from those limitations.
I thought we were able, since there was 25 on the committee, that we would be able, 4 or 5 of us or 6 of us, be able to get together and talk about what we're working on.
I'll go back to my other point. There is no such thing as a quorum here. If one person shows up, you can conduct a meeting, theoretically, because we are not structured in a way that we have to have 15 or 18 or 20 to hold a meeting. Consequently, without the definition of a quorum, which then would allow you some latitude, you're not in a position. You can have your own viewpoints, but they can only be shared with others in this forum.
I thought we established quorum the very first night. I thought that was discussed.
Yeah.
I thought the quorum was whoever shows to the meeting.
I don't remember that.
No, I didn't have that under.
We had no numbers associated with quorums.
I honestly thought I remembered a discussion of a number.
Pardon?
I honestly thought we had a discussion of a number.
Yes.
By your definition, if I see Larry at the grocery store, I can't
You can't talk to him.
You can talk to him, but you can't talk to him about the business of this body.
No.
We established, there were 26 original members of this committee, and I think a quorum was set up as 13 or more.
14.
And because we had to count, one of the meetings, we only had like 15 people, and we actually did have a quorum.
I'm sorry. We'll go back and check, but that's not what I'm told from the minutes.
Could we ask Rourke to come up or ask Rourke to address this?
Rourke, could you at least address my point? But I don't, honestly, folks, I'm not ever trying to make it tougher on anybody, but I do not recall the construction.
If that decision was made, it should be contained within the minutes of the meeting, and the minutes are all here. All we have to do is check them.
Dick, would you like to read the conclusion of the open meeting law?
Not just yet. Let me see if we can answer
No,
this
it
other
needs
one.
to come from our minutes.
Let's answer this first.
Was I imagining that?
Could you go back in the minutes? Do you have them there? Can I look?
Legal actions, we don't take it.
I honestly thought we talked about specifically for the briefing about open meetings law, we did establish a quorum.
Yeah, but I didn't see
What that meant.
Does anybody have specific information on this? Because I don't believe there was a vote on that in any fashion. Yes.
When I gave a presentation the first night for the open meeting law, I was basing it on my knowledge of the open meeting law with a quorum of a group. And if I wasn't taking it as a group like this where people would be dropping out. So that if I say that in error, well, that night there were 26 people here, so I did. I said, so you have a body of 26 people here, so this would be your quorum.
Yeah.
That night, when everybody was in attendance, the quorum that night was that many people. But now you've had people drop out.
Okay, so the quorum number goes down, but we
But-
still have a number.
But they also say, Dick also said last week that I asked where your poll was on these people, and you said we may have one that possibly will dropped out. The rest just aren't attending.
Right.
That's
right.
That's a different thing. We're still a committee, and it wouldn't be filled. So we're still a committee of 25 or 26.
I'm sure we can get a legal answer for this.
I think the answer, we'll address this. We should address it right now if there's a way to do this, because I think the point you're making is understandable. If there were that many people, in other words, what you're saying is this is how many it takes to have a vote. Do you want to wait? Is this something we can do now?
Well, what I would tell you is the general public policy is that public bodies make their decisions and their discussions in public. I mean, that's your general principle on which the open meeting law is.
But if we're not making decisions and we're just having discussion.
No, the open meeting law says that public decisions and the discussion associated with them shall be had in the public so your citizens can observe the decision-making process. That's your fundamental public policy behind the open meeting law. You can try to circumvent the open meeting law.
Nobody's interested in doing that. So
that can happen. I don't recommend it. When I see emails amongst 7 council members, usually the following email is me saying, remember the open meeting law. You can electronically, inadvertently, have a meeting. And that is if a number of the persons of the public body, which you are a public body under Arizona statute, engage in a discussion electronically. There's also an Attorney General's opinion that will say that unilaterally proposing a course of action electronically can, in fact, violate unilaterally by one person the open meeting law.
Well, and there's been at least 2 examples where the city has communicated with all of us electronically about things about the meeting, and then most recently about the meeting that, telling us about the meeting that was here today. So, I mean...
Oh, I think there's a difference between information and
Right. There's a difference between information
decision
sharing
making.
and discussing a topic that's going to be subject to your ultimate decision making.
What about our questions and answers?
Those are posted on the public.
That's really at the beginning why the structure was to simplify and not to get into that bind, that it would come through me and then I post all the answers. So anybody asks any question, it's posted for all to read.
Well, it shouldn't be too much of a problem for the next 2 weeks, because we're all waiting with bated breath to see what Larry says anyway.
So please be guided by that, folks. That's nothing more than just a suggestion that I think is important.
Is my motion still on the floor?
That's where I was going next.
Okay.
No, you have to make the motion again because you withdrew.
I'd like to talk a little bit about it before we actually have a motion. Can we talk about the notion of how we will report? Is that what that's about, Joan?
It's about our final report.
Right. Can we talk about it a little bit so that we can kind of get a feel for what we want? I'm interested in knowing, first of all, Dick, how you envisioned this final report coming about. Is there a group process that leads to it, or how do you see this happening?
Yes, there's a group process. At the point when you feel you have collectively, or it appears that you collectively have reached a conclusion on several things, many of which were probably discussed tonight, then I would take that information and I would record it into what I would say is a rough draft report, which will come back to you with this question. Does this report capture what your interest, what you want to present to the board, to the council? And from the beginning, we've said that whatever is submitted to the council will have as an addendum all the original information. So everybody's perspective, even if it didn't make the final cut as a body, would still be represented by the attachment. And then you would doctor that as you see fit, and only when that information fit you collectively would it then be finalized, and it would come to you for signature of everybody here, and then be presented to the city council. That was the intention, and my role would be to assemble, to put it in a form that's readable, and bring it back to you as a draft. You would then change it or take it forward. You would then sign it.
So I'm assuming, Joan, that what you were going to propose was that someone do exactly what Dick has just said that he would be doing, which is form a draft and bring it back here. And so do you still feel the need for your motion, because you would rather have somebody on the committee make that draft to bring it back to the group? Or
I do. Let me tell you why.
Okay.
Okay, we are chosen by the council to be on this committee. This is our committee. We have invested our time and our hours researching, logging, working, going through all, figuring out what all we need to come up or want to come up with to report to the city council. It's our report. There is ownership when we produce something that comes from all of us together. It's all, we're all buying into or accepting ownership with what's presented. I believe when we have somebody that is not on our committee do that, it becomes their report. It's their report of our ideas. If we produce it, it's our ideas. It's all of it. It's we're doing it and we're presenting it.
Yes, sir.
Is there anybody here that wants to write the report?
Well, let's see. This is Mike Yek. My interest is that making sure, as a citizen, that our voice as a committee and personally as a citizen gets heard. And I guess what I don't want to see happen, in the spirit of trying to consolidate, get concise, whatever the case may be, that we imaginate too much of the information too quickly, that we lose subtle points that each of us have kind of brought up around the issues. My concern was I just want to make sure that somebody from a committee's perspective is looking to make sure that the committee, that we don't kind of overwrite the top of the committee in the spirit of trying to over-consolidate the information, that something doesn't get lost in the transmission. Secondarily, I personally am willing to and present to the council if necessary to make sure that our voice gets heard in specific detail of what we've come up with, regardless of whether or not the city adopts it, regardless of whether or not it financially is viable, regardless of whether or not there are legal issues associated with the implementation. I just want to make sure that we as citizens, our voice gets heard.
Please keep in mind that I wouldn't be signing this. You would, and I wouldn't be presenting it. You would.
Who would present it to council then?
Whoever you would like.
So we could defer that decision to
and then you could do it as a body, or you could select an individual, but it wouldn't be me.
Well,
normally.
Yeah, and I would say I had a little more concern about that before the meeting started tonight. But after listening to everybody here, I heard way more consensus than I heard disagreement. So I have a lot less concern about that, but I would say I'd like to defer that decision till later. And in the spirit of the open meetings laws, I'll tell everybody here that I wrote down 12 items that it looked like we all agreed on, and there were 7 other items that were incidental to that, and I'm going to send them to Dick. Okay, I'm going to write them down and send them to Dick, and if you want them, you send him an email and ask him if
I will post them.
Post them?
Yes, sir, Gary.
I would like to offer a little bit of a compromise, and maybe if the committee selects a person, I would like that person, that representative of the committee, to work with you to boil the information down into a more manageable group of suggestions. And I think that would give you have the expertise of looking through all this stuff and being able to say, okay, this person talked about this piece, this information, and I had 14 of these things. I'm going to boil it down into one sentence. And then if you work with somebody from the committee, I think we'll get both a consultant's point of view and we'll get a committee's point of view, and I think we'll get a better product.
That's great.
I don't want Mike writing it all himself. That's not his job, and that's not his skill set. It might be, but it's more in a commercial.
Do I want to admit to that?
It's more in a commercial orientation, whereas you have a government orientation. And I think whoever we choose to represent us will be able to take the broad spectrum, work with you, and boil it down into 8 or 10 cogent points.
Now, I have no problem with that or anything else you come up with, but I do think that it still is critical that whatever is created comes back to this body for a very intense look to see if you feel individually and collectively represented.
I guess that's why I'm confused about this whole thing. I mean, in the end, we're going to sign off on it, and we're looking at it, and so as far as who wrote it or whatnot, it's not like I have this feeling that somebody thinks that somebody's going to go behind our back and submit something that we didn't approve when that's not going to happen, because we were going to sit down, look at the report that's written. So whether Mike writes it or whether you guys write it together or whether you just write it, in the end, I'm going to see it, and we're going to discuss that and decide whether it's whether we approve it or not, and what changes need to be made. So that's just my feeling. It's just kind of, I guess I feel like I'm on a teeter.
I agree with the last statement, and if the motion remains on the floor, I'd like for us to have a vote on it and just put it away after that.
It's not on the floor, Charles.
Do we need to make a motion, or do we want to not talk about this tonight?
Well, if you don't talk about it or don't make a motion, I'm going to continue to do what I, whether we're working together or not. I'm fine. I'm going to assemble data and when it's appropriate and start to put together. I'm not known for short reports. So I tend to be more inclusive than exclusive about those things, and certainly it'll come back.
Is the forum that council is going to receive this in going to be a work session?
I don't know that.
I would hope it would be.
It would make sense.
It would be a work session. How the report gets to them, as long as we all agree to it.
I would like to see a written. I'd like to see a written and an oral report.
Well, yeah, it'll be a written, but
yes, sir.
I would think that just the experience with other councils, I'm assuming this council anybody on this committee who feels strongly enough can stand up in front of them and talk, they're going to want to hear what you have to say to emphasize whatever your point is in that particular document. And they're not going to want just a spokesperson standing up there and regurgitating what's in that document. They're going to want to hear from as many people that feel strongly enough about something. And I would encourage it to be scheduled in a work session, not at a council meeting.
Yes, sir. Makes sense. Holy smokes, it's 9 o'clock.
I personally don't feel like we need the motion tonight. I just want to be able to know that we'll talk about it again and decide
Yes,
who
ma'am.
should write when the time comes.
I move to adjourn. How's that?
Yes, sir. Joan, you okay with that?
Yeah, I am. I
Okay.
just want to make sure this is as grassroots as you get, our committee. I
I've
don't
never
want
felt
it-
that it was anything other than that.
Yep.
just
Good,
don't want
thank
it to
you.
get lost.
When I see you next, I'll have my